Approximately 20 million years ago, during the early Miocene epoch, the oceans of the world were warmer than they are tonight. Along the coastlines of every continent, except the frozen south, shallow seas spread across drowned continental margins, their surface waters holding a warmth that in many regions stayed close to 25 or 26 degrees Celsius through the whole of the year. There were no great polar ice sheets in the north. Sea levels stood higher. Sunlight fell on broad, productive shallows where nutrients welled up from below, and in that light the smallest life in the sea, the single-celled algae drifting in the surface layer, multiplied in quantities that fed everything above them. Into those warm and crowded waters, the whales had come. Not the whales we know, but their Miocene ancestors. Dozens of kinds of baleen whales, many of them smaller than the giants of the modern ocean, moving in numbers through seas rich enough to sustain them. Slow, warm-blooded, full of oil and muscle, they were the largest reliable source of food the ocean had ever assembled in one place. And where food gathers on that scale, something arrives to hunt it. Somewhere in that warm sea, the largest shark that has ever lived was already swimming an animal that would grow longer than a school bus, weigh as much as a small herd of elephants, and leave behind, across nearly every ocean on Earth, teeth the size of a human hand. We call it Megalodon. Its full name is Otodus megalodon, and it is at once the most famous prehistoric predator in the ocean and one of the least understood. For all its fame, almost nothing of it survives, and this is the quiet question that will carry us across the next 2 hours. How did a warm, whale-filled ocean build the largest hunter the sea has ever made, and why, when scientists finally reconstructed it from the little it left behind, did it turn out to be nothing like the monster we had imagined? And why, in the end, did this enormous animal vanish, while smaller, humbler hunters swam on into the world we live in now? And before we begin, one small thing. If these quiet journeys help you rest, please consider subscribing to the channel. It would mean a great deal to me. It genuinely helps more than you might think, and it is what lets these long, peaceful nights keep being made. Thank you for being here. Let's begin. Chapter 1. A Sea Built for Giants. Before we go further, where in the world are you listening from tonight? I always find it quietly remarkable how far these journeys travel. To understand the animal, it helps to first understand the water. The Miocene Ocean was not a single uniform sea, but a warm and shifting system, and the conditions that made it so were the same conditions that would, much later, take Megalodon away. Global temperatures through much of the epoch were higher than today, though gradually cooling from an earlier warm peak. The arrangement of the continents was close to the modern map, but with crucial differences. The Isthmus of Panama had not yet closed, so the Atlantic and the Pacific were still joined through a tropical seaway, and warm currents circulated through gaps that no longer exist. Shallow seas flooded the low edges of the continents, and it was in these sunlit shallows, not in the cold and lightless deep, that the ocean did most of its living. The base of that living was invisible. In the surface layer, microscopic algae and other drifting plankton captured sunlight and turned it into the first food of the sea. Where cool, nutrient-rich water rose from below along certain coasts, this production surged, and the plankton bloomed in densities that fed vast populations of small fish and filter feeders. That, in turn, fed larger animals and larger ones above them. A productive surface is the foundation of everything that follows, because the energy of sunlight can only pass upward through a food web so many times before it runs out. To hold a great predator at the top, the base must be enormous. The Miocene Ocean had exactly such a base, and it built upward from there with a generosity the modern ocean rarely matches. The most consequential thing that base fed was the whales. The Miocene was a golden age of cetaceans. Baleen whales, the filter feeders that strain small prey from the water, had diversified into a great range of forms, many of them mid-sized by modern standards, perhaps the length of a small boat rather than the length of a ship. There were smaller toothed whales as well, and seals and dugong relatives grazing the sea meadows in warmer bays. For a hunter large enough and powerful enough to take them, these warm-bodied, energy-rich animals were the richest prey imaginable, each one a single meal that could sustain an enormous predator for a long time. The whole architecture of the age of ocean giants rests on this one fact. The sea had filled with fat, slow, abundant whales, and something was going to rise to eat them. That something did not appear from nowhere, and it did not appear all at once. It was the last and largest member of a dynasty that had been growing, tooth by tooth, for tens of millions of years. But before we can meet that dynasty, we have to reckon with a strange and humbling problem. For an animal this famous, this enormous, and this successful, we possess almost none of its body. To understand why, we have to look not at the shark, but at what a shark is made of. Chapter 2: The Tooth in the Rock. For most of human history, people who found megalodon teeth had no idea what they were holding. The teeth turn up in coastal sediments and riverbeds and quarry walls around the world broad, heavy triangles of dark, fossilized enamel, some of them longer than a grown hand from wrist to fingertip. In the ancient and medieval worlds, these were often called glossopetrae, or tongue stones, and were widely believed to be the petrified tongues of dragons or serpents, or objects fallen from the sky during eclipses. They were carried as charms and set into amulets, thought to protect against poison. The truth was stranger and, in its way, grander. They were the teeth of a shark that had died millions of years before any human walked the earth. It was only in the 17th century that the Danish scholar Nicholas Steno, examining the head of a large shark, recognized that the tongue stones were simply fossilized shark teeth. A small observation that helped open the whole idea that fossils are the remains of once living things. Nearly 2 centuries later, in the 1840s, the Swiss naturalist Louis Agassiz gave the animal a formal scientific name. But here is the difficulty that has shaped everything we think we know about Megalodon, and it is worth sitting with, because it explains why so much of its story is written in careful hedges rather than certainties. Sharks are not built like us. A shark has no true bones. Its skeleton is made almost entirely of cartilage, the same flexible, gristly material that shapes the tip of a human nose or the rim of an ear. Cartilage is light and strong and well suited to a life of constant swimming, but it has one great weakness as a candidate for fossilization: it rots. When a shark dies, its cartilage skeleton usually breaks down and disappears, long before it can be buried and turned to stone. What survives, reliably, is the teeth, because teeth are coated in a mineral hard enough to endure, and, far more rarely, the centra, the small disc-shaped cores of the vertebrae, which in some sharks are partly hardened and can, under the right conditions, be preserved. Sometimes the tiny tooth-like scales of the skin survive as well. So this is what we have of the largest shark that ever lived: teeth in great abundance, a scattering of vertebral centra, and a few scales. There is no complete megalodon skeleton anywhere on Earth. There is no preserved outline of its body, no fin, no tail, no snout. Everything else, its length, its shape, its weight, the way it swam, the way it hunted, has had to be inferred, painstakingly, from teeth and discs and comparisons with living sharks. It is as if we were asked to reconstruct an entire animal from its fingernails and a few beads of its spine. The wonder is not that our picture of Megalodon has been uncertain. The wonder is that, from so little, patient work has recovered so much, and that the picture has recently changed in a way almost no one expected. Before we come to that change, we should follow the teeth backward in time, because the teeth are not only how we know Megalodon, they are also how we watch it being made. Chapter 3: A Dynasty of Teeth. Megalodon did not begin as Megalodon. It was the culmination of one of the longest evolutionary sequences in the fossil record, a lineage of ever larger sharks whose slow transformation is written, tooth by tooth, across more than 50 million years of rock. Paleontologists call this group the megatooth sharks, and following their teeth through the layers is like watching a single idea being refined again and again until it reaches its most extreme expression. The story reaches back into the age of the dinosaurs. The distant ancestor of the whole line was a modest shark called Cretalamna, swimming in Cretaceous seas alongside the marine reptiles. From that root emerged, in the warmer world that followed the dinosaurs' extinction, a shark named Otodus obliquus, already a large animal, perhaps 9 to 12 meters long, with broad teeth that carried small side points, called cusplets, flanking the main blade. Its teeth had smooth edges, well suited to gripping and holding slippery, struggling prey. This was a hunter of fish and other quick, soft-bodied animals, a grasping predator, not yet a cutting one. Then, across the following epochs, the teeth begin to change, and the change has a direction. The edges acquire serrations fine, saw-like teeth within the tooth that turn a gripping blade into a slicing one. The crowns broaden and take on a more purely triangular shape. The little side cusplets shrink generation by generation, until they finally disappear altogether, a slow subtraction that unfolded over roughly 12 million years. Follow the named stages, and you follow the animal growing into its role. Otodus auriculatus. Then Otodus angustidens, a shark of perhaps 11 or 12 meters, whose nurseries have even been identified in places where the fossil beds are dominated overwhelmingly by the small teeth of juveniles. Then Otodus chubutensis, larger still, reaching perhaps 13.5 meters, its teeth so close to megalodons that specialists distinguish them by subtle differences in the root and the last traces of the vanishing cusplets. And finally, the teeth lose their side points entirely, the serrations become fine and regular, and the crown reaches its greatest breadth. The dynasty has arrived at its final form. What was driving this long refinement? The most compelling answer lies in what the sharks were eating. As the teeth shifted from gripping to cutting, the ocean was filling with larger and larger warm-blooded prey, the whales, whose own bodies were growing through the same span of time. A tooth built to hold a wriggling fish is not the right tool for a whale. A whale must be cut, its thick hide breached, its ribs cracked, its flesh sheared away in enormous pieces. The serration, the breadth, the loss of the delicate side points that would only get in the way, every one of these changes reads as an adaptation toward carving flesh from very large animals. The Dynasty of Teeth was, in effect, the ocean's long answer to the question of how to eat a whale. And there is a quieter marvel folded into this. We can watch an entire lineage evolve, across deep time, in a single organ, the tooth, because the tooth is nearly all that fossilizes. The very limitation that hides Megalodon's body reveals its ancestry with unusual clarity. But that same clarity has, for well over a century, misled us about one basic thing: what kind of shark Megalodon actually was. To see how, we have to look at the animal it was so long mistaken for. Chapter 4. The Great Misunderstanding. For most of the time that people have known Megalodon, they have pictured it as a single, simple thing: a great white shark, scaled up to nightmarish size. Every museum model, every illustration, every film built its version of the animal on that assumption. Give a great white the proportions of a bus, sharpen its teeth to the length of a hand, and you have the monster of the popular imagination. It was a reasonable guess, and for a long time it was the best guess available. But it was, in an important sense, wrong, and the correction tells us something about how science works when the evidence is thin. The mistake had a logic to it. Megalodon's teeth do resemble a great white's: broad, triangular, serrated, and for decades the simplest reading was that the two were close relatives, that Megalodon belonged in the same family as the modern great white, and that it was essentially a giant version of the same design. This is why the great white became the model for every reconstruction. If you have almost no body to work from, you borrow the body of your subject's nearest living relative and scale it up. The whole familiar image of Megalodon was built on that single inference of kinship. The trouble is that the kinship appears to have been an illusion. More recent work places Megalodon not in the family of the great white, the Lamnidae, but in a separate, entirely extinct family, the Otodontidae, whose line had diverged from the ancestors of the great white far back in time. The strong resemblance between their teeth is now read not as a sign of close relationship, but as a case of convergence. Two hunters, facing the same problem of cutting large prey, arriving independently at the same shape of blade, the way a shark and a dolphin arrive independently at the same streamlined body without being closely related at all. Megalodon and the great white were not parent and giant child. They were distant cousins who happened to invent similar knives. This matters far more than a question of family trees, because it pulls the great white out from under the reconstruction. If Megalodon was not simply a giant great white, then borrowing the great white's stocky, torpedo-shaped body to imagine, it may have been a mistake from the start. And that is precisely the thread that scientists began to pull in recent years, a thread that, when it finally came loose, unraveled the monster we thought we knew and replaced it with something stranger, and in its way more elegant. To follow it, we have to ask the oldest and simplest question about this animal, the one everyone asks first. How big was it really? Chapter 5. How big? Really, the size of Megalodon has always been the heart of its fame, and for a long time the honest answer to how big was it was, we are estimating from teeth. The reasoning ran like this: in living sharks whose teeth and bodies we can measure directly, there is a rough relationship between the height of a tooth and the length of the animal. Measure a Megalodon tooth, apply the relationship, and you get a length. Different teeth and different methods gave different answers, but the numbers that emerged from the great white model tended to cluster somewhere in the range of 15 to 18 meters for large individuals already, an astonishing size for a shark, 3 times the length of a big great white, and enough to make Megalodon the largest macro-predatory shark known. But tooth scaling has a built-in weakness. A tooth's height depends heavily on where it sat in the jaw, and estimating a whole animal from a single tooth stacks uncertainty on uncertainty. So attention turned, where it could, to the rare vertebral remains the disc-shaped centra that occasionally survive, because a string of vertebrae records something a lone tooth cannot: the length and the load-bearing architecture of the spine itself. And it was here, working from a remarkable fossil, that the picture changed. In a study published in 2025, a large international team led by the paleobiologist Kenshu Shimada re-examined the body of Megalodon using a preserved vertebral column from Belgium, a trunk of spine measuring about 11 meters in length, together with even larger vertebrae from Denmark, and comparisons across more than 140 living shark species and a number of extinct ones. By analyzing the relative proportions of head, trunk, and tail across all those species, they estimated the full length of the Belgian individual at around 16.5 meters. And by extrapolating to the largest known vertebrae, from Denmark, they arrived at a maximum possible length of about 24 meters, roughly 80 feet for the very largest individuals, with a weight, at that extreme, estimated near 94 tons. Verify the 24-meter figure is the upper maximal estimate, not a typical size. Numbers on that scale are difficult to hold in the mind, so it is worth translating them. A blue whale, the largest animal alive today, reaches around 30 meters. A megalodon at the upper estimate was approaching that, a predatory fish nearly as long as the largest whale that has ever existed, and heavier than the space shuttle, even at the more ordinary 16 or 17 meters of a well-preserved individual. This was an animal longer than most of the whales it hunted. But the truly surprising result of that study was not the length. It was what the vertebrae implied about the shape. Because when the researchers asked whether a great white's stocky body could even be supported on a spine of the measured thickness, the answer came back no, and that answer overturned 2 centuries of pictures. Chapter 6. The shape we got wrong. Here is the quiet revolution at the center of the modern megalodon. The vertebrae, the team argued, were simply too slender to carry a great white's build. If you took the compact, muscular, torpedo shape of a great white and scaled it up to 16 meters, the spine required to support that mass of muscle would have to be far thicker than the fossil vertebrae actually are. A great white-shaped megalodon on this spine would have risked, in effect, breaking its own back. The body the bones could support was a different body altogether. Longer, leaner, more slender, closer in its proportions to a modern lemon shark than to a great white. And when the researchers looked at the largest animals in today's ocean, this began to make a deep kind of sense. The truly gigantic swimmers of the modern sea, the whale shark, the basking shark, the great whales themselves, are not stocky. They are elongated and streamlined. There appears to be a reason for this, rooted in the plain physics of moving a large body through water. A stocky, chunky shape becomes hydrodynamically expensive very quickly as it grows. The drag and the energy cost of hauling that bulk through the sea rise steeply. Above roughly 7 meters, the team suggested, a stocky body form simply becomes too costly to be viable, which is very likely why the great white, for all its power, does not exceed about 7 meters and cannot become a true giant. To pass that ceiling, an animal must go slender. The elongated shape is not incidental to gigantism. It may be the very thing that permits it. Seen this way, Megalodon's slenderness was not a curiosity but the key to its size. It was gigantic because it was streamlined. A stockier megalodon could not have existed at that length. The animal our imaginations built, the bulldog-bodied great white blown up to monstrous proportions, was not merely inaccurate. It was, by the logic of the water itself, impossible. The real megalodon glided rather than bowled its way through the sea, a long, smooth, tapering shape moving with the efficiency of a whale rather than the coiled bulk of its distant great white cousin. Estimates of its cruising speed, drawn from the structure of its scales, place its comfortable traveling pace at only a couple of kilometers an hour. Verify the unhurried, energy-sparing glide of a large animal that had nowhere it needed to rush to. There is one more thing the modern picture adds, and it will matter greatly when we come to the animal's end. Megalodon appears to have been what biologists call mesothermic, able to hold parts of its body warmer than the surrounding water, as some fast, powerful sharks do today. Some estimates put its internal temperature well above the sea around it. Verify body temperature figures are modeled and uncertain. A warm body is a powerful body. It lets muscle work hard and fast in cool water, and it may have been part of what let the megatooth line grow so large and hunt so effectively. But warmth has a price. A warm-bodied giant must eat enormously and constantly to fuel the furnace, and that hunger, so useful in a rich ocean, becomes a trap when the ocean grows poor. We will return to that. First, we should look at the instrument that all of this size and warmth and streamlining existed to serve the part of Megalodon we actually possess in abundance. The bite. Chapter 7, The Bite. Everything about Megalodon that we can hold in our hands is, in the end, about the mouth. The teeth are what survived, and the teeth were the point of the animal, the working edge where a warm, streamlined, 16-meter body met its prey. A single large tooth can be longer than a human hand and broad as a saucer. Its face, a smooth triangle, its edges lined with fine serrations, its root a heavy, thickened base that anchored it in a jaw we can only reconstruct. To understand Megalodon as a hunter is to understand what that tooth was built to do. Its design is a cutting design. The broad triangle, the serrated edges, the thickness through the crown, these are not the tools of a shark that grips and holds. They are the tools of a shark that shears. Where the ancestral megatooths, with their side cusplets and smoother edges, had been built to grasp fish, Megalodon's teeth were built to carve flesh from animals far too large to swallow whole. The serrations worked like the edge of a good bread knife, concentrating force along fine points to saw through hide and muscle, and, when necessary, bone. And the force behind that edge appears to have been extraordinary. A modeling study by the researcher Stephen Rowe and colleagues estimated Megalodon's bite force at somewhere between roughly 108,000 and 182,000 newtons at the back of the jaw, figures so large they are hard to make ordinary. Verify these are modeled estimates. For comparison, the same approach put the bite of a large great white at around 18,000 newtons. Megalodon's bite, on this estimate, was something like 10 times as powerful among the most forceful bites ever estimated for any animal. And the researchers noted that even these numbers understate the real violence done to prey, because a feeding shark shakes its head from side to side, and that lateral thrashing multiplies the cutting force far beyond what the jaws alone produce. We should be careful here, and Megalodon rewards care. A bite force is a calculation, not a measurement. No one has ever tested it, and the true figure carries real uncertainty. But we do not have to rely only on the model, because the prey themselves bear witness. Fossil whale bones have been found carrying the marks of megatooth teeth, deep gouges and punctures raked across ribs and vertebrae, the physical record of a hunt preserved in the very bone of the hunted. In some cases, the marks show no sign of healing, meaning the animal did not survive the encounter. In others, the placement of the wounds tells us something about how the shark attacked. The bite was not a matter of speculation. It left its signature in stone, and that signature lets us do something remarkable. Reconstruct, from tooth, marks alone, how the largest shark in history killed. That is the next question, not how hard it bit, but how, and where, and on what. Chapter 8, The Hunt. Imagine the warm, open water off a Miocene coast, the light coming down green and diffuse. Somewhere below and behind, in the blue, a long, dark shape has taken an interest. It does not rush. It matches pace, unhurried, reading the whale's movement, closing the distance with the patience of an animal that has done this many times and has energy to spare. And then, in the last moments, it commits. The fossil evidence suggests that Megalodon did not hunt the way the great white does. A great white typically strikes at the soft underside of its prey, taking a single massive bite and then withdrawing to let the wound do its work. Megalodon appears to have aimed differently for the chest. The pattern of bite marks on whale remains points to attacks directed at the rib cage and the region of the heart and lungs, as if the shark's strategy was not to bleed its prey slowly, but to breach the chest cavity and destroy the vital organs directly. For an animal of Megalodon's power, this was possible where it would be suicidal for a smaller hunter. Its jaws could crack through the bony wall that protects a whale's heart, turning the ribs from armor into shrapnel. A single such bite could end a large animal quickly. Against smaller cetaceans, a different method appears in the record. Some small whale fossils show compression fractures, bones crushed in a way that suggests the animal was struck with tremendous force from below. Rammed rather than simply bitten, the impact itself doing lethal damage before the teeth ever closed. A 16-meter body driving upward carries an almost unimaginable momentum, and for prey of the right size, that momentum alone was a weapon. Most striking of all is a single fossil that records a hunt gone strange. A tooth belonging to a raptorial sperm whale, a predatory whale in its own right, was found bearing the bite marks of a megatoothed shark on its very root, in a way that suggests the shark had aimed for the whale's head and broken its jaw in the attack. The jaw is not a nutritious place to feed. A shark scavenging a carcass would have little reason to focus there. The placement reads instead as a deliberate strike at the head of a dangerous prey animal, the sensible way to disable a hunter that can fight back. It is a small, sharp window onto a truth we will come to. Megalodon did not always hunt the helpless. Sometimes it hunted other hunters. All of this predation rested on the abundance beneath it on the whales, and the smaller prey that filled the warm sea in numbers great enough to feed a population of the largest sharks that ever lived. To understand how such a predator could exist at all, we have to look at the prey base that made it possible, and at the crowded, warm-blooded world that Megalodon rose to rule. Chapter 9. The whales it ate. A predator is only ever as possible as its prey, and Megalodon was possible because the Miocene Sea was, above all, a sea of whales. To sustain a population of 16-meter, warm-bodied sharks, not one individual, but breeding numbers of them across the world's coasts, the ocean had to be producing warm-blooded prey on a scale difficult to picture now. It was, and the reason lies in that rich, sunlit base we began with, translated upward into blubber and bone. The baleen whales of the Miocene were not, for the most part, the vast animals we know today. Many were mid-sized, some no larger than a small boat, and they came in a diversity of forms that has since narrowed. Among them were the cetothers, a group of modest baleen whales that were especially abundant, filtering the plankton-rich shallows and, in doing so, converting the ocean's invisible production into large, slow, oil-filled packages of food. For a hunter that had spent tens of millions of years perfecting the art of cutting flesh from large animals, a sea full of mid-sized whales was very nearly a sea made to order. There were other prey as well, smaller toothed whales and dolphins, seals and sea lions along the coasts, sirenians grazing the warm sea meadows, great fish and turtles. But it was the whales that mattered most, because a whale is an extraordinary concentration of energy. To eat a whale is to take, in a single successful hunt, enough food to sustain an enormous body for a long stretch of time. This is the deep logic of the whole age of ocean giants. A predator can only grow as large as its prey and its hunting success allow, and mid-sized whales, abundant and rich, permitted a predator to grow larger than any shark before or since. The size of Megalodon was, in a real sense, a measurement of the size and abundance of Miocene whales. But abundance drew a crowd, a resource that rich does not go to a single diner. The warm Miocene Sea was not Megalodon's private hunting ground. It was contested, and some of the animals it shared that water with were formidable enough to give even the largest shark reason for caution. Among them was a predator that has, with some justice, been called Megalodon's rival, an animal that hunted the same whales, in the same seas, and was very possibly capable of turning on the shark itself. To meet it, we leave the sharks for a chapter and turn to a whale that had become a hunter of whales. Chapter 10. The rival that could fight back. Not every large animal in the Miocene Sea was prey. Somewhere in the same warm waters, hunting the same whales, moved a predator that met Megalodon nearly as an equal, not a shark at all, but a whale that had become a hunter of whales. Its name is Leviathan melvillei, and it is one of the few animals in the fossil record that can be spoken of in the same breath as Megalodon, without exaggeration. Leviathan was a sperm whale, but not the gentle, squid-eating sperm whale we know today, where the modern sperm whale has only small teeth in its lower jaw and dives into the deep dark to hunt soft-bodied squid. Leviathan carried an armament of enormous teeth in both jaws, some among the largest biting teeth of any animal known, longer than a forearm set in a skull built for seizing and tearing large, struggling prey. It reached a length of around 17 meters, verify, comparable to a large megalodon, and it was, unmistakably, a raptorial predator, a whale designed to kill other whales. Its very name pairs the biblical sea monster Leviathan with Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick, a fitting christening for a creature that turned the placid image of the sperm whale on its head. Two great hunters, then, in the same rich sea, pursuing the same rich prey. What did that mean for either of them? The honest answer is that we do not know, and cannot, whether they clashed directly. The fossil record preserves the marks of hunts, but it rarely preserves the meeting of two apex predators, and we should resist the temptation to invent a duel that the evidence does not support. What we can say is more interesting and more restrained. Some researchers have suggested that Leviathan, with its formidable teeth and its likely intelligence, was capable of taking sharks in the 6 to 10 meter range verify, which would make it a genuine danger to younger or smaller megalodons, if not to the largest adults, and a warm-bodied, air-breathing whale carried certain advantages a shark did not. The capacity to hunt cooperatively, perhaps, and a metabolism that could range more freely across changing seas. Leviathan was not alone in this role. Other raptorial sperm whales, smaller relatives such as Zygophysidae and Acrophysidae, occupied similar niches, hunters of mid-sized prey in the same warm waters. Together they formed a guild of whale-eating whales that shared the top of the food web with the megatooth sharks. This is the quiet point of the chapter, and it will matter greatly at the end. Megalodon was never the ocean's only apex predator. It was the largest of several, in a crowded high tier that a rich sea could afford to support. And a crowded top tier is a stable arrangement only for as long as the sea stays rich. When abundance falters, the animals that had comfortably shared the peak are suddenly competitors for a shrinking prize. Leviathan was the rival that could fight back. But it was not the rival that would ultimately outlast Megalodon. That distinction belonged to a smaller, humbler newcomer, an animal that could not have challenged a full-grown Megalodon for a moment, yet possessed the one quality that would decide everything. To meet it, we turn to the arrival, late in this story, of the first true great whites. Chapter 11, The First Great Whites. Late in Megalodon's reign, a new shark appears in the fossil record, smaller, leaner, and at first glance, unremarkable beside the giant. It was an early great white, and one well-documented form carries the name Cartilage hubeli. It could not have threatened a large Megalodon. It was a fraction of the size, and yet its arrival marks, in retrospect, the beginning of the end for the megatooth line, not through combat, but through the slow arithmetic of competition. The great white and Megalodon, as we have seen, were not close kin. The resemblance of their teeth was convergence, not inheritance. But convergence in tools often means convergence in habits, and the early great whites hunted much the same prey Megalodon did the whales and seals and large fish of the productive coasts. In a full sea, this overlap would have mattered little. There was food enough for both. The difference lay in what each animal could do when the sea began to empty. Megalodon was a specialist of the grandest kind, enormous, warm-bodied, tuned to a diet of large, energy-rich prey, and bound to warm water. The great white was, and remains, a generalist. It was smaller, and so needed less. It could tolerate cooler water, and crucially, it could switch its diet. When large prey grew scarce, a great white could turn to smaller fish, to seals, to whatever the sea still offered. Flexibility is an unglamorous virtue, easy to overlook beside the spectacle of a 90-ton predator. But flexibility is precisely the virtue that matters when the world contracts. There is a broader lesson folded into this contrast, one that recurs throughout the history of life, and that the calmest reading of Megalodon's fate turns upon. Specialization toward maximum performance in a stable, abundant environment is enormously rewarding while the environment holds. A body perfectly I know to hunt large whales in warm, productive seas is the finest possible design, right up until the whales thin out and the seas cool. Then the very traits that yet made the specialist supreme become the weight that pulls it under. The great white's modest, adaptable body was not better than Megalodon's in any absolute sense. It was better suited to the world that was coming. That world had already begun to arrive. Even as the early great whites spread, the ocean that had built and sustained Megalodon for millions of years was quietly changing, cooling, shifting, closing certain doors and opening others. The competition of a small rival shark was only one pressure among several, and not the deepest. But before we follow the giant to its end, we should widen our view, because to understand both how such an animal could rise and why it finally fell, we have to see the whole world that made it, the deep origins of its line, the dynasty of ever larger sharks that led to it, the whales that fed it, the other hunters that shared its warm sea, the drowned coasts where its teeth still lie thickest, the strange warm engine that ran inside it, and the patient work by which a giant is reconstructed from a handful of teeth. That is the world we turn to now. Chapter 12. Out of the Age of Reptiles. The story of the largest shark that ever lived does not begin with the shark. It begins, strangely, with an absence, with the great emptiness left in the ocean when the Age of Reptiles ended. Around 66 million years ago, the same catastrophe that swept the dinosaurs from the land emptied the seas of their rulers as well. The mosasaurs, and the other giant marine reptiles that had held the top of the ocean's food web for tens of millions of years vanished, all of them, in a geological instant. The sea was left with its summit, unoccupied, a vast ecological throne, suddenly and completely vacant. Nothing filled it quickly. For a long stretch of time, the recovering ocean had no giant apex predator at all, only smaller hunters working their way upward into the space the reptiles had left. But the sharks were waiting. Sharks were already ancient by then. Their basic design had been refined across hundreds of millions of years and had carried them, unlike so many other lineages, straight through the Great Extinction. Among the survivors was a modest shark called Cretolamna, unremarkable in the Cretaceous seas it had shared with the mosasaurs, but destined to become the root of a dynasty. From Cretolamna, in the warm world that followed, the megatooth line would grow. That world was a greenhouse. The early part of the age of mammals was far warmer than today, its seas broad and tropical, and into those warm waters came a new kind of prey that would change everything. The whales were being born, not born in the sea, but returning to it. Their ancestors were four-legged land mammals that, across the early part of the age of mammals, waded, then swam, then abandoned the land entirely, their bodies reshaping over millions of years into the fully aquatic forms we know. The first whales were small and strange, but the lineage grew, and as it grew, it seeded the ocean with something it had never held in such abundance: large, warm-blooded, energy-rich mammals swimming in the open sea. Here, then, were the two halves of a story that would take 30 million years to unfold. On one side, a line of sharks descending from Cretolamna, growing larger and refining their teeth. On the other, a line of whales returning to the sea and growing larger in their turn. The rise of the one was bound to the rise of the other, in the oldest arrangement in the living world. Predator and prey climbing together, each pressing the other upward. The whales offered a richer and richer prize. The sharks evolved to take it, and the ocean's long vacant throne began, at last, to be filled not by a returning reptile, but by a fish. The giant we came to know as Megalodon was the far end of that climb. But to see how far it was, we have to walk the climb itself to meet the ancestors, one by one, as the living apex predators they each were in their own age. Chapter 13, Before the Giant. Long before Megalodon, its ancestors ruled. Each was, in its own epoch, among the largest predators in its sea. And following them forward is like watching a single design being sharpened stroke by stroke across the ages. The teeth tell the story, because the teeth are nearly all we have, but for once, that is enough, because it is precisely in the teeth that the change is written. The line's first great figure was Otodus obliquus, a shark of the warm early seas that already reached perhaps 9 to 12 meters, an enormous animal by any measure, larger than any shark alive today. But its teeth were built for a different kind of hunting than Megalodon's. They carried small side points, little cusplets flanking the main blade, and their edges were smooth. This was a grasping tooth, a tool for seizing and holding slippery, struggling prey, the fish and early marine animals of its time. Obliquus was a giant, but a giant that gripped. Then, across the epochs that followed, the crucial change begins. Serrations appear along the edges of the teeth, fine, saw-like ridges that turn a gripping blade into a cutting one. It is no coincidence that this happens as the whales in the sea are growing larger and more numerous. A tooth that grips is right for a fish, a tooth that cuts is right for a whale, whose thick flesh must be sheared rather than merely held. Follow the named stages of the climb, and you watch the design converge on its purpose. Otodus angustidens, of the cooler seas that followed the early warmth, reached perhaps 11 or 12 meters, its serrated, still-cusped teeth clearly built for larger prey. From this species comes one of the most precious fossils in the whole lineage, a partial associated skeleton found in New Zealand, some 26 million years old, preserving around 165 teeth together, with about 35 vertebral centra, a rare glimpse of an animal we usually meet only one tooth at a time, an individual estimated at over 9 meters long. And from a fossil bed in South Carolina comes something rarer still, a place where the great majority of the teeth, nearly 9 in every 10, belong to juveniles. That is the signature of a nursery, an ancient birthing and rearing ground where the young of these giant sharks grew up in sheltered water, tens of millions of years before Megalodon's own pups would do the same. Then comes the last ancestor, Otodus chubutensis, larger again, perhaps 13.5 meters, and so close to Megalodon that the two are difficult to tell apart. The distinction lies in the smallest of details. Chibutensis still bore the faintest traces of the ancestral side cusplets, the last remnants of the grasping tooth, which Megalodon would finally lose altogether, and its roots and crown differ subtly from the giants. The two even overlapped in time, Chibutensis and the early Megalodon swimming the same seas, the old form giving way to the new. The vanishing of those last little cusplets, a slow subtraction across millions of years, is the final stroke of the whole long refinement the moment the grasping tooth becomes, completely, a cutting one. This is the deep truth that the Dynasty of Teeth reveals, and it is easy to miss beneath Megalodon's fame. The giant was not a sudden monster that appeared fully formed. It was the summit of the longest continuous climb in the shark record, a 50-million-year arms race between sharks that grew larger and whales that grew larger, each ancestor an apex predator in its own right, each tooth a little more of a blade than the one before. Megalodon was the last and greatest expression of a design the ocean had been perfecting since before there were whales worth the name. And the reason the design kept climbing, the engine at the very base of the whole ascent, was the extraordinary abundance of those whales, the sea of warm-blooded prey that made a predator of Megalodon's scale not merely possible but, in a sense, inevitable. But before we turn to that sea of whales, it is worth pausing on the giant's own kind, the wider family of sharks it belonged to, nearly all of them now utterly vanished, and the handful of living cousins that, for all their resemblance, are not its descendant at all. Chapter 14. Cousins of the Giant. Megalodon did not swim alone in the deep history of its lineage. It was the last and largest member of a whole family of sharks, the Otodontids, and understanding that family, and the strange fact that not one of its members survives today, places the giant more truly than any single portrait of the animal can. The Otodontids were a lineage apart. For all that Megalodon's teeth resemble a great white's, it was not a lamnid, not a member of the family that holds the living great white and mako and salmon sharks. It belonged to its own separate family, one that arose deep in the age of mammals, produced a succession of ever larger predators, and then, with Megalodon's passing, vanished entirely. There are no Otodontids left. The family that had ruled the warm seas for tens of millions of years left no living descendant at all, a completeness of extinction that is easy to miss beneath Megalodon's fame. When the giant died, its whole kind died with it. But Megalodon was not the only Otodontid swimming the Miocene seas, and one of its lesser cousins is worth meeting. A shark named Megalolomna, described only recently from scattered teeth, lived in the same early Miocene oceans, a far smaller animal, roughly the size of a modern great white, at perhaps 4 or 5 meters, its teeth built to grasp at the front and slice at the sides, likely feeding on medium-sized fish rather than whales. Like Megalodon, it is known almost entirely from its teeth. Like Megalodon, it ranged widely, its fossils turning up in California, in North Carolina, in Peru, in Japan. It shared the giant seas as a distant relative might share a wide country smaller, quieter, hunting different prey, but cut from the same ancient family cloth. Its discovery also settled an old argument of names. The same study that described it concluded that Megalodon and its megatooth kin belonged not in the genus they had long been assigned to, but in the genus Otodus, which is why the giant is now most properly called Otodus megalodon. Even the name of the largest shark that ever lived is still, in its way, being worked out. The family's warm-blooded design, too, ran deeper in time than Megalodon itself. The same reasoning that identifies the Otodontids as regionally warm-bodied extends to some of their older relatives, sharks, such as the Cretoxyrhinids, great Cretaceous hunters that may have carried the same inner warmth long before the megatooth line reached its peak. The warm, fast, active macro shark was not Megalodon's invention. It was a design the group had been exploring across 100 million years, and Megalodon was simply its ultimate expression. And what of the living great white, so often mistaken for Megalodon's small surviving cousin? It is not. The great white belongs to that separate lamnid family, and its resemblance to Megalodon, the broad serrated teeth, the powerful body, the warm-bloodedness, is a case of convergence, of two different lineages arriving independently at the same solutions because they faced the same problem: how to be a large, warm, active hunter of big prey in the open sea. The great white is not the Megalodon's descendant but its echo, a separate answer to the same question. Megalodon's true family is gone without remainder, and the animal that most reminds us of it is, in truth, only a distant cousin wearing a similar shape. To be such an animal warm, powerful, powerful, built to hunt across whole oceans, is also to perceive the sea in a particular way. Through senses tuned to a scale of hunting we can scarcely imagine, it is worth trying to enter that world of perception, to sense the ocean as the giant did. Chapter 15. A sense of the sea. To understand how a single shark could find enough food across the vastness of an ocean, we have to leave the visible world behind and enter the sea. As Megalodon sensed it, a world far richer in information than our eyes would suggest, read through senses tuned to detect prey across great distances of dark water. The giant did not simply see its ocean, it smelled it, felt it, and read the faint electricity of living bodies within it, in ways that made the open sea far less empty than it looks to us. Foremost among a shark's senses is smell, and in a large shark the capacity is extraordinary. Vast areas of the animal's brain and snout are given over to detecting dissolved chemistry in the water, the faint traces of blood, of injured flesh, of prey at concentrations almost impossibly low. Carried on the currents, a scent can reach a hunting shark from a great distance, and by comparing the strength of a smell arriving at one nostril versus the other, the animal can steer up the gradient toward its source. For a predator that fed rarely but enormously, ranging across whole oceans between meals, this long-range chemical sense was the primary tool of the hunt. The sea, to Megalodon, was a shifting map of scent trails, and a wounded or dying whale was a beacon that could be followed across miles of open water. Closer in, other senses took over. Running along the flanks of a shark is the lateral line, a row of tiny sensors that read the pressure and movement of the surrounding water, allowing the animal to feel the thrashing of struggling prey, the wake of a passing body, the subtle disturbances that travel through the sea as vibration. And nearest of all, when the giant closed on its target, the most uncanny sense of all came into play: electroreception. Scattered across a shark's snout are hundreds of tiny pores, jelly-filled canals, that detect the faint electrical fields generated by the muscles and nerves of every living animal. At close range, no prey can hide from this sense. The very beating of a heart, the twitch of a muscle, betrays a hidden animal to a shark that can feel electricity. It was, in effect, a final targeting system, guiding the enormous jaws to their mark in the last instant of the strike. Even in murky water or darkness, hearing and sight filled out the picture. Sharks hear low, distant sounds, well, the kind of irregular thrashing that means a wounded or struggling animal, and can orient toward such sounds across long distances. Vision was useful but secondary, a sense for the final approach rather than the long search, adapted to the dim blue light of the shallows and the upper water where the giant hunted. Layered together, these senses gave Megalodon a perception of the sea utterly unlike our own, a world where a drop of blood spoke across miles, where the water itself carried the movements of distant bodies, and where, at the last, the electric signature of a beating heart drew the strike home. It is a humbling thing to imagine an animal moving through the ocean inside a sensory world so foreign to ours, reading the sea through scent and pressure and electricity as fluently as we read a landscape by sight. And every one of these senses was present, fully formed, from the very beginning of a Megalodon's life, sharpened, not in the open ocean, but in the warm, sheltered shallows of the nursery, where the giant began its life as a newborn already 3 or 4 meters long, learning to read the sea in miniature before it ever met a whale. It is there, in the shallows, at the very start of a single life, that we can watch the giant begin. Chapter 16. The First Year. Return once more to the warm shallows off an ancient coast, not to watch a giant hunt, but to watch one begin. Here, in the sheltered, sunlit water of the nursery, a newborn Megalodon takes its first slow movements through the sea. And though it is a creature we would call a monster, there is nothing fearsome in this scene. Only a young animal, alone from its first moment, feeling its way into the world it will one day rule. It is already large 3, perhaps 4 meters, longer than most predators the sea has ever made, and it is already, from birth, entirely alone. There is no parent here, no protection. Among these sharks, the young are born ready, and the mother is gone. But the pup is not born into the open ocean, and that is the whole meaning of the nursery. The warm coastal shallows are a refuge, sheltered from the largest hunters of the deep water, including, perhaps, the great adults of its own kind, which keep to the open sea. Here, in the warm margins, the young shark has room to grow through its most vulnerable years, hunting the smaller prey the shallows offer, the fish, the smaller marine animals, the abundant life of the productive coast. Its senses, already sharp, are tuned to this smaller world, the scent of a fish, the electric flicker of a hidden body in the sand, a scaled-down rehearsal of the hunting it will one day carry into the open sea. The first year is slow and warm and largely uneventful, and that is exactly what the young shark needs. It grows quickly, faster than a great white grows, its body lengthening season by season as it feeds in the sheltered water. It learns the shallows, the rhythms of the tide, the places where prey gathers, the feel of the warm coastal sea. And it grows, too, toward the size at which the open ocean will no longer be a danger but a domain, when it can leave the nursery behind and range out into the deeper water where the whales are. That crossing is years away. For now, there is only the warm, shallow sea, the slow, steady growth, the patient first chapter of a life that may stretch across many decades. There is a tenderness in this that is worth holding on to, because it complicates the monster of our imagination in the gentlest way. Every megalodon that ever lived, every enormous whale-hunting giant began exactly here, as a lone young animal in a warm, quiet nursery, growing slowly through a sheltered childhood in the shallows. The largest hunter the ocean ever made was once a small thing feeling its way through warm water near a coast, learning the sea. The giant and the newborn are the same animal, seen at two ends of a long life. And the warm shallows that cradled the young were as essential to the megalodon's existence as the open ocean it would one day command. And in time, the young shark would make its crossing. Grown large enough that the deep water held no danger, it would leave the warm shallows behind and move out into the open sea, and there it would take its place at last among the great hunters, in pursuit of the richest and most demanding prey the ocean held. It would become, in other words, a hunter of whales. And it is the whales, the sea of warm-blooded prey that made the whole long story possible, that we turn to now. Chapter 17: A Sea of Whales. To call the Miocene a sea of whales is not a figure of speech. The warm oceans of Megalodon's age held a diversity of whales that the modern world, for all its living giants, does not match, and understanding those whales is the surest way to understand the shark, because a predator is a portrait of its prey. And Megalodon was, above all, a portrait of the Miocene whale. The baleen whales had, by then, perfected one of the great innovations in the history of the sea, the ability to filter. In place of teeth, they had grown baleen, the fringed, comb-like plates of keratin that let a whale take in a great mouthful of water and strain from it the small, dense life the ocean produces in such quantity. Filter feeding freed the whales from hunting one prey at a time and let them harvest the sea's abundance in bulk, and it made them, in turn, into vast, slow, oil-rich packages of energy, swimming concentrations of everything the productive surface had produced. But the Miocene whales were not, for the most part, the enormous animals we picture today. The truly gigantic baleen whales, the blue whale-scale giants, came later, in the cooler ages after Megalodon was gone. The whales of the giant's own time were, by and large, small to mid-sized, some no longer than a boat, and among the most abundant of them were the cetotheres, a family of modest baleen whales that thronged the productive coasts in great numbers. These were the staple, the bread of the warm sea's food web. Not the largest whales imaginable, but the right size, and above all the right abundance, to feed a population of enormous sharks. That right size matters more than it may seem, and it points to a subtlety that has quietly reshaped how paleontologists think about Megalodon. We tend to imagine the giant locked in combat with the largest whales it could find, and no doubt it took large prey when it could. But the direct fossil evidence tells a broader story. At a site in the Pisco Formation of Peru, bite marks matching a megatooth shark were found, not on some colossal whale, but on the bones of a small cetothare, a little baleen whale named Piscobalaena nana, and on the remains of seals. The marks are among the clearest records anywhere of what Megalodon actually fed upon, and they suggest that its diet extended well down into the smaller, more abundant prey of the warm sea, not merely up toward the giants. This is not a diminishment of the animal. It is a clarification of it. A predator that could take small, common whales and seals as readily as large ones was drawing on the broadest and most reliable part of the food web, which is exactly what an enormous, constantly hungry body requires. And here, folded into the abundance, lies the seed of the ending. If Megalodon leaned heavily on the small and mid-sized whales that filled the warm coasts, then its fate was bound to theirs. As the seas cooled in the ages that followed, it was precisely these mid-sized baleen whales whose diversity collapsed, many kinds dwindling and disappearing. the survivors trending toward the larger, cold-tolerant, pole-going forms that would become the great whales of today. The staple thinned. The bread of the warm sea grew scarce. A predator built around the abundance of mid-sized whales could not easily follow that abundance. As it declined and migrated into cold water it could not enter. The very whales that had built Megalodon, that had drawn its ancestors' teeth from grasping hooks into cutting blades across 50 million years, were the whales whose disappearance would, in the end, help take it away. But the whales were not Megalodons alone. A sea, this rich in warm-blooded prey, drew other hunters to the same table, and some of them were formidable enough to make the giant shark one apex predator among several in a crowded and dangerous company. Chapter 18. The Other Hunters. It is tempting to imagine Megalodon as the lone ruler of its ocean, unchallenged and unrivaled. The truth is more interesting. The warm Miocene Sea was one of the most crowded arenas of large predators the ocean has ever assembled, and Megalodon shared its water and its prey with a whole company of formidable hunters, several of them capable, in the right circumstances, of holding their own against the giant. The most striking of these we have already met. Leviathan, the raptorial sperm whale of around 17 meters verify, armed with some of the largest biting teeth of any animal known, a whale that had turned hunter of whales. But Leviathan was not a lone monster either. It was the largest member of a whole guild of predatory sperm whales. Smaller relatives, animals such as Zygophysidae and Acrophysidae, filled out the ranks, mid-sized whale hunters working the same seas. We even have a fossil that catches one of these encounters in stone, a tooth from a small sperm whale of this kind, bearing the bite marks of a megatooth shark across its root, in a way that suggests the shark had struck at the whale's head and broken its jaw. Two lineages of apex predator, mammal and fish, warm-blooded and warm-bodied, hunting the same whales in the same water and, at least once, hunting each other. Nor were the great predatory whales the only rivals. The sharks themselves were diversifying. Alongside Megalodon swam other large sharks of its warm seas, among them the broad-toothed forms of the lineage sometimes gathered under the name Otodus, the very stock from which the modern great white would eventually emerge, and the ancestors of the tiger sharks, generalist scavengers and hunters ranging the same coasts. These were smaller than Megalodon, but they were competitors for the same prey, and one branch of them, as we have seen, would outlast the giant entirely. Below and around these top hunters, the warm sea filled with the rest of a rich marine mammal fauna, seals and sea lions hauling out along the coasts, early dolphins hunting in the shallows, and the first ancestors of the killer whales, though the earliest of these were likely modest animals, hunting small fish and squid, rather than challenging the giants, and their role as true competitors remains uncertain. There were even stranger members of this world. In the warm bays of what is now Peru grazed Thalassocnus, a marine ground sloth, a slow, aquatic relative of the tree sloths, feeding on the sea meadows of the coastal shallows, and its bones, too, bear the marks of the great predators of that sea. Both Leviathan and Megalodon appear to have hunted it. A predatory sea sloth's remains, marked by the teeth of the largest shark that ever lived, is the kind of detail that reminds us how genuinely foreign the Miocene Ocean was. A warm, crowded, productive world, full of animals that have no exact counterpart today, layered thick with hunters at every level. The meaning of this crowd is the quiet argument of the chapter, and it will matter at the end. A single ocean supporting so many large predators at once, great sharks, whale-hunting whales, diversifying dolphins and seals. The first orcas is only possible when the sea beneath them is extraordinarily rich, when the whales and fish and other prey are abundant enough to feed them all without the hunters driving one another to ruin. A crowded summit is a sign of plenty, but it is also a fragile arrangement, because it has no slack. When the plenty falters, the animals that had comfortably shared the peak are turned, all at once, into competitors for a shrinking prize, and the largest and hungriest among them, the one that needs the most and can adapt the least, is the one with the most to lose. Megalodon sat at the very top of that crowd, and the crowd, and the plenty that sustained it, have left their record in a handful of extraordinary places around the world, where the drowned coasts of the Miocene preserved the whole teeming world at once. But the crowd, and the plenty that sustained it, sat within a world whose very shape, its continents, its currents, its open gateways between oceans was arranged, for a while, exactly as a warm and generous sea requires. That arrangement is worth seeing, because it explains why the age of ocean giants happened when it did. Chapter 19. The Shape of the Miocene World. The age of ocean giants was not only a matter of warm water and abundant whales, it rested on the very shape of the planet, on an arrangement of continents, currents, and open sea gateways that, for a span of millions of years, was configured almost perfectly for a warm, wandering giant. To understand why Megalodon rose when it did, and why its world could not last, we have to see the map of the Miocene Ocean. Begin with the warmth itself. For much of Megalodon's reign, the world was warmer than it is today, and a warmer world is a higher water world. With less ice locked at the poles, sea levels stood higher, and the sea reached far up onto the edges of the continents, flooding their margins into broad, shallow, sunlit shelf seas. These flooded shelves were the engine rooms of the warm ocean's productivity, vast, shallow expanses where light reached the bottom, where nutrients gathered, where the great populations of fish and whales could feed. The high seas of the warm Miocene did not merely surround the continents. They drowned their edges, turning coastline after coastline into the rich, shallow, whale-filled water that the giant required. The stage on which the age of giants played out was, quite literally, larger than the coastlines of today. Then consider the gateways. The map of the Miocene Ocean was, crucially, more open than our own. The Americas were not yet joined. Where the narrow Isthmus of Panama now links North and South America and walls the Atlantic off from the Pacific, there stood, for most of Megalodon's reign, an open seaway, a warm water passage through which the tropical Atlantic and Pacific flowed into one another. Warm currents passed between the oceans. Marine animals could travel from sea to sea. The warm belt of the world was a single, connected, circulating whole. For a transoceanic wanderer like Megalodon, this was a world without walls, a continuous warm ocean it could range across without obstruction, its distant populations linked by open water. The connectedness of the warm seas was part of what allowed a single kind of giant shark to rule coasts on every continent at once. This was the arrangement at the height of the warmth. A high sea flooding broad productive shelves, warm currents circulating through open gateways, the tropical oceans of the world knit into one connected, generous, whale-filled whole. It was, for a warm water super predator, as favorable a configuration as the planet has ever offered, and Megalodon filled it completely. From the coasts of the Americas to the shores of Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia. But a configuration of continents and currents is not a permanent feature of the Earth. It is a passing arrangement, and every element of the one that made Megalodon possible was, even at its height, slowly beginning to change. The warmth would withdraw and the high seas would fall, draining the productive shelves. The open gateway at Panama would slowly close as the Americas drifted together, walling the Atlantic from the Pacific and rerouting the currents of the world. The connected warm ocean would be broken into pieces. The very shape of the world that had built the giant would, in time, be rearranged into a world with no place for it. That slow rearrangement is the story of the ending, but before we follow it there, we can see the warm world at its fullest in the places that preserved it, the extraordinary coasts where the giant's teeth still lie thickest. It is to those places that we turn now. Chapter 20. The Coasts of Plenty. An animal known almost entirely from teeth is, in a sense, an animal known from places from the particular coasts where those teeth came to rest and were, against long odds, preserved. Megalodon's teeth are scattered across nearly every warm and temperate shore on Earth, but they are not spread evenly. They concentrate, in astonishing numbers, at a handful of extraordinary sites where the drowned coasts of the Miocene were preserved almost whole, and to walk those sites, even in the mind, is to walk the giant's world. The greatest of them lies in a desert. In the Ica Desert of southern Peru, the rocks of the Pisco Formation preserve one of the finest windows onto the Miocene Ocean anywhere in the world. This was once a warm, productive coast, its shallow bays fed by cold, nutrient-rich water welling up from the deep, the ancestor of the great upwelling that still makes the Peruvian coast one of the richest fisheries on the planet. That richness filled the ancient bays with life, and the fine sediments of the seafloor buried and preserved it with rare completeness. Not just the durable teeth, but whole skeletons of whales and dolphins, seals, marine crocodiles, sea turtles, seabirds and penguins, and the giants themselves, Megalodon, the raptorial whale Leviathan, and the strange aquatic sloth that grazed the sea meadows. It is here, in the Pisco Rocks, that Megalodon's bite marks were found on the bones of small whales and seals. the predator and its prey preserved together in the same drowned coast. To read the Pisco Formation is to read the whole teeming warm sea at once. Hunters and hunted laid down side by side. Half a world away, near Bakersfield in California, a very different site tells a complementary story. Sharktooth Hill, in the layer geologists call the Round Mountain Silt, is one of the most concentrated marine bone beds ever found. A Middle Miocene deposit, laid down some 15 or 16 million years ago, so densely packed with fossils that a single cubic yard of it can hold hundreds of specimens, and so diverse that around 140 vertebrate species have been recovered from it. Sharks and rays, whales and dolphins, sea lions, sea cows, and turtles all lie jumbled together in a bone bed formed where a river delta met a warm inland sea, and here a small mystery in the record becomes visible. At Sharktooth Hill, Megalodon teeth are actually uncommon, even as other sharks abound, whereas along the eastern coast of North America, in formations like the Calvert Cliffs of Maryland and the Pungo River rocks of North Carolina, Megalodon teeth are among the most familiar of all fossils, weathering out of the sediment by the thousand. The giant was not everywhere in equal measure. Its remains cluster where the warm, productive coasts it favored happened to be, and thin where they were not, so that the map of Megalodon's teeth is, in effect, a map of the ancient coasts where it thrived. Even the recent revolution in how we picture the animal came out of such places. The vertebral columns that let researchers rethink Megalodon's size and shape, the 11-meter trunk of spine, and the larger vertebrae that pushed the maximum estimate toward 24 meters came from the coasts of Belgium and Denmark, where the right conditions had preserved not merely teeth, but the rare, precious discs of the spine. Every advance in our understanding of the giant has come from some particular drowned shore giving up a little more of what it held. There is a reason these coasts, and not the open ocean, hold the record. Sharks shed teeth constantly, thousands across a lifetime, and where sharks were abundant along the rich, whale-filled coasts, teeth rained onto the seafloor in vast numbers. Where the seafloor was the fine, mineral-rich mud of a productive shallow sea, those teeth were buried and preserved. The open deep ocean, by contrast, keeps almost nothing. Its floor is too far down, too slow, too poor in the sediments that make fossils. So the fossil megalodon we know is specifically the coastal megalodon, the shark of the warm, productive shelf seas, which is also, and not by accident, the megalodon that the cooling and draining of those very shelves would strike hardest. The places that preserved the giant were the places that made it, and the places that, when they changed, would help unmake it. What allowed a single kind of animal to rule all these coasts at once, Peru and California and the American East and the shores of Europe, was not only the abundance of the seas, it was something inside the animal itself. A warm engine, unusual among sharks, that powered its enormous body and set the terms of where it could live and how much it had to eat. That engine is the next piece of the puzzle, and it sits at the very heart of both the giant's success and its fall. Chapter 21. The warm-blooded engine. Most sharks are cold. Their body temperature simply tracks the water around them, rising and falling with the sea. And for most sharks, this is a perfectly successful way to live. It is cheap, it demands little food, and it has served the group for hundreds of millions of years. But a small and remarkable handful of living sharks do something different, and understanding what they do is the key to understanding how Megalodon could be both so large and so vulnerable at once. The great white, the mako, and a few of their close relatives are what biologists call regionally endothermic. Using specialized networks of blood vessels that trap the heat their muscles generate, they keep certain parts of the body, the swimming muscles, the gut, the brain, and eyes, significantly warmer than the surrounding sea. A warm muscle is a stronger, faster muscle. A warm gut digests more quickly. Warm eyes and brain react faster. This inner warmth lets these sharks swim powerfully and tirelessly, hunt in cooler water than a cold-bodied shark could tolerate, and range across wide stretches of ocean in pursuit of large, active prey. It is, in effect, a partial warm-bloodedness, invented independently by these sharks, much as it was by birds and mammals, and it is the reserve of the ocean's most active hunters. There is good reason to think Megalodon possessed this same warm engine, and possessed it to an extreme degree. One line of argument, developed by the researcher Humberto Ferran, holds that regional warm-bloodedness was present throughout the megatooth line and was, in fact, a driver of its gigantism, that the warm engine and the giant body evolved together, each making the other possible, an active, warm-bodied predator growing larger and larger across the ages. And a more recent study reached the same conclusion by an entirely different route. By measuring the subtle chemistry of Megalodon's tooth enamel, the way certain atoms bond within it at different temperatures, researchers estimated the temperature at which those teeth formed and found it notably warmer than the seawater the animal lived in. Verify the precise temperature offset is a modeled estimate. Two independent approaches, one from the logic of body size and one from the chemistry of the teeth themselves, arrive at the same striking picture. The largest shark that ever lived was, in part, warm-blooded. This warm engine explains a great deal. It helps explain how Megalodon could grow so enormous and remain an active, pursuing hunter rather than a sluggish giant. It helps explain how it could range across the warm and temperate seas of the whole world. It fits with everything we have seen of its power and its reach. The inner fire was, for millions of years, the source of the giant's supremacy. But a fire must be fed, and here the engine that made Megalodon supreme becomes the trap that helped destroy it. Warmth is not free, it is bought with food, and the more of the body an animal keeps warm, and the larger that body is, the more it must eat simply to keep burning. A warm-bodied giant lives always at the edge of a great and constant hunger, dependent on a steady, reliable flow of rich prey to fuel the furnace it cannot switch off. In a warm, whale-filled ocean, this was no burden at all. The fuel was everywhere, but it bound the animal tightly to exactly those conditions. It could not, like a cold-bodied shark, drop its metabolism and wait out lean times on little food. It could not follow its cooling prey into cold seas without paying an ever steeper price to stay warm. The engine that had driven the giant upward across 50 million years was an engine that had to run hot and run always, and could not easily be banked. When the ocean that fed it began to cool and empty, the warm-blooded giant found itself with the highest fuel bill in the sea and a dwindling supply to meet it. Just how large that bill truly was, how much a 16-meter, warm-bodied hunter had to take from the ocean simply to live, is worth pausing on, because it is the plainest measure of why, when the plenty faltered, the greatest of all sharks was the one that could least afford it. Chapter 22. A Giant's Appetite. The plainest way to feel Megalodon's dependence on a rich ocean is to reckon, as best we can, with how much it had to eat. A body that large, kept partly warm, swimming across whole oceans, was a furnace of extraordinary appetite, and putting numbers to that appetite, even rough ones, turns the abstract idea of a specialist predator into something you can almost hold. A few years ago, researchers built a full three-dimensional model of Megalodon from that same exceptionally preserved vertebral column recovered from Belgium, the spine of a single animal that had died some 18 million years ago. At around 46 years of age, its growth recorded in the bands of its vertebrae, reconstructing the whole body around that spine. The team estimated a 16-meter Megalodon at more than 60 tons, cruising at around 1.5 meters a second, a comfortable pace that, modest as it sounds, was faster than a whale shark or a great white can manage, and enough to carry the animal across vast distances. Verify the 60-ton mass derives from a great white-based model. The later slender reconstruction revises the animal's proportions, though the broad, energetic picture stands. To keep that body running, they estimated, Megalodon needed something on the order of 100,000 kilocalories every single day, and carried a stomach of nearly 10,000 liters, the volume of a small room. Numbers like these can numb rather than inform, so it is worth translating them into behavior. An appetite that vast could not be met by grazing on small fish. It demanded rich, calorie-dense prey, and nothing in the sea is richer than the blubber of a marine mammal. The model suggested that a single meal, the size of a modern killer whale, a whale of perhaps 8 meters taken in only a handful of enormous bites, could satisfy Megalodon so completely that it might then travel thousands of kilometers across an entire ocean without needing to feed again for as long as 2 months. This is the portrait of a genuine transoceanic superpredator, an animal that fed rarely but colossally, gorging on a single great, fatty meal and then roaming for weeks on the strength of it, ranging across the warm seas of the world in search of the next. There is an elegance to this economy, and it fits everything else we have seen. The unhurried cruising speed, the patient ambush, the strike aimed at the blubber-rich chest, the slender, efficient body built for long-distance travel, all of it serves a strategy of feasting and roaming, of converting rare, enormous meals into weeks of range. In a warm ocean thick with whales and seals, this was a superbly successful way to live. The giant did not need to hunt constantly. It needed only to encounter, now and then, one large, rich animal, and in the crowded warm seas of the Miocene, Such encounters were common enough to sustain a population of the largest sharks the world has ever held. But every strength in this portrait is also seen from the other side. An exposure and the appetite is the deepest exposure of all. A strategy built on rare, enormous, calorie-dense meals works beautifully only where such meals are reliably available. Thin out the whales, scatter them, drive them into cold seas the shark cannot follow, and the gaps between feasts begin to stretch. A body that must find a great fatty meal every few weeks can endure a lean season. It cannot endure a lean age. And because that body ran partly warm, it could not simply shut down and wait, the way a cold-blooded shark can drift through hard times on almost nothing. The furnace had to be fed. The very appetite that had made Megalodon a ruler of the plentiful sea became, when the sea grew poor, the debt it could not pay. A giant's hunger is the truest measure of a giant's dependence, and Megalodon's hunger was the greatest the ocean had ever had to satisfy. This strategy, the single enormous meal, then the long roam meant that much of a megalodon's life was not spent hunting at all, but traveling, crossing vast reaches of open ocean, alone, on the strength of one great meal. It is worth following the giant out into that emptiness, because the long crossing was as much a part of its life as the strike. Chapter 23. The Long Crossing. Follow the giant then, out past the productive coast and into the open ocean, not toward a hunt, but away from one. A great meal is done. The enormous body is fed, and now begins the other half of the megalodon's life, the half we rarely imagine, the long, solitary crossing of an empty sea. The water here is different from the crowded shallows. Beyond the rich margins, the open ocean opens out into a vast blue emptiness, its surface far above catching the light, its depths falling away into shadow, and through this immensity the giant moves alone. There is no urgency now, and no hunting. A single whale, taken days ago, has fueled the furnace for weeks to come. There is only travel the slow, steady, economical beat of the great tail, carrying the animal forward through open water at a pace it could hold for a very long time. Mile after mile of blue passes beneath and around it, and the coast falls away behind, and ahead there is only more ocean. This is what the giant's body was built for, as much as for the strike. The slender, streamlined form, the warm and tireless muscle, the efficient cruising gait, all of it serves the long crossing, the ability to convert one enormous meal into weeks of range, to travel thousands of kilometers across the open sea before needing to feed again. A single great meal might carry the animal from one warm coast to another halfway across an ocean basin, roaming for as long as 2 months through open water, following the faint scent maps of the sea, drifting through the wide blue on the strength of a feast long finished. The megalodon was not a creature of one bay or one coast. It was a wanderer of the whole warm world, and much of its life was spent exactly here, crossing the emptiness between the rich places. There is a profound solitude to this, and a strange grandeur. The giant crosses the open ocean alone, as it does everything alone, born alone, hunting alone, roaming alone across seas so vast that another of its kind might be 100 miles away or 1,000. It moves through a blue immensity, indifferent to it, neither hunting nor hunted, simply traveling, its enormous body a slow, dark shape in an endless expanse of water and light. It is easy, watching this in the mind, to feel the sheer scale of the ocean it moved through, a scale that dwarfed even the largest animal in it, and made of its whole life a long, patient passage through emptiness between the rare, bright moments of the feast. And all of this, the crossings, the range, the weeks of solitary roaming across whole oceans we have reconstructed, like everything else about the giant, from teeth and a handful of vertebrae, that so much of an animal's life and movement can be read from so little, is the quiet marvel at the center of this whole story. It is worth seeing, now, just how much a single tooth can be made to say. Chapter 24. Reading the giant's teeth. Hold a megalodon tooth in the mind. A broad, heavy triangle, dark with age, its face smooth, its edges finely serrated, its base a thick, splayed root. To an untrained eye, it is simply a large and striking object. To a paleontologist, it is a dense document, a compressed record of an animal's size, its diet, its way of hunting, even the temperature of its blood, and learning to read it is much of how the giant has been recovered at all. The first thing a tooth reveals is position. A shark's teeth are not uniform. Those at the front of the jaw differ in size and shape from those at the sides, and a tooth's dimensions depend heavily on where it sat in the mouth. This is why estimating an animal's whole length from a single tooth is so treacherous. and why the most careful size studies work, where they can, from a full set of teeth, a complete dentition rather than an isolated one. A single tooth can mislead. A whole jaw's worth constrains the animal far more tightly. Much of the long uncertainty about Megalodon's size comes down to this simple fact. For most individuals, we have only scattered teeth and must reason outward from them with great care. The second thing a tooth reveals is diet, how the animal fed. Megalodon's teeth are cutting tools, broad for a wide wound, thick to resist breaking, edged with fine serrations that shear through flesh the way a serrated blade shears through a tough rind. This is not the tooth of a fish catcher. It is the tooth of an animal that carved large, warm-bodied prey, and the teeth carry the marks of that work. Some are found chipped or worn in ways that hint at contact with bone, at the hard business of biting through a whale's ribs. Their very shape is a record of behavior. Read backward from the tool to the task it was made for. But teeth tell us about diet in a second, more direct way, through the marks they leave behind. Along the ancient coasts where the fossil record is richest in the rocks of Peru, in the phosphate deposits of the American East, the bones of Megalodon's prey have been found bearing the unmistakable signatures of its bite. Gouges and punctures raked across the ribs and vertebrae of small whales, across the bones of seals, even across the remains of a marine sloth. These marks are the closest thing we have to watching Megalodon feed. They tell us not only that it ate large whales, but that it fed, too, on the smaller and more abundant animals of the warm sea, a breadth of diet that reflects the sheer scale of its appetite. There is even a way to read a tooth's chemistry. Locked into the mineral of the enamel, formed while the animal lived, are subtle traces, isotopes whose proportions record things the shape of the tooth cannot. How high in the food web the animal fed, and how warm its body ran while the tooth was forming. It was partly through this chemical reading of enamel that researchers concluded Megalodon hunted near the very top of its food web and kept its body warmer than the surrounding sea. The tooth, in other words, is not only a shape, but a sample, a small mineral time capsule that preserves a chemical portrait of the living animal, sealed for 3 million years and more. To recover a giant from such fragments is a strange and humbling kind of science, and it is worth honoring the patience it demands. Every claim about Megalodon, its length, its weight, its speed, its diet, its warmth has been reasoned outward from teeth and a handful of vertebrae, each inference tested against the anatomy of living sharks and hedged where the evidence thins. It is an act of reconstruction carried out across centuries and continents, by many hands, from almost nothing, and nowhere is that reconstruction harder or more contested than in the oldest question of all, the question of size and shape and age, of how you weigh and measure and date an animal whose body has almost entirely dissolved into the sea. That work, the long effort to weigh a ghost, is worth seeing up close. Chapter 25, The Giant's Grip. A predator of Megalodon's scale did not merely live within its ocean, it shaped it. For something like 20 million years, the largest hunter the sea has ever made was a constant, structuring presence at the top of the warm water food web, and the pressure of that presence reached downward through every level beneath it, quietly organizing the whole living sea. To understand what Megalodon was, it helps to understand not only how it fed, but what its feeding did to the world around it. The great predators of any ecosystem exert what ecologists call top-down control. By hunting the animals below them, they hold those populations in check, shape where and how their prey lives, and so influence, in turn, everything their prey depends upon. The effect ripples down the food web, level by level, a phenomenon visible today whenever a top predator is removed from a modern sea and the whole system reorganizes in its absence, prey multiplying, their own food thinning, the balance shifting. For 20 million years, Megalodon was that kind of force across the warm oceans of the world, a check on the great populations of whales and seals, a pressure that shaped their numbers, their behavior, and their movements. The warm Miocene sea was held, in part, in the shape that it was by the grip of its greatest hunter, which means that when that grip finally released, the ocean changed. Researchers who modeled Megalodon's ecology have suggested that its extinction was not merely the loss of one spectacular animal, but an event with consequences that rippled across the whole marine world. A transoceanic predator that traveled thousands of kilometers between enormous meals had been, among other things, a mover of nutrients feeding in one place, ranging to another, knitting distant parts of the ocean together through its own vast wanderings. The loss of the largest such traveler may have altered the way nutrients moved through the seas. Verify the nutrient transport inference is a modeled hypothesis. And there was a second, more visible consequence. With their greatest predator gone, the large whales were released from a pressure that had bounded them for 20 million years. And in the ages that followed, the whales grew. The truly gigantic baleen whales, the blue whale and its kin, the largest animals that have ever existed on Earth, rose to their full and unprecedented size in the cooler seas after Megalodon vanished. It is at least possible that the age of the greatest whales was made partly by the ending of the age of the greatest shark. That the giants of the modern ocean could only become giants once the giant that hunted them was gone. There is a quiet symmetry in this that is worth sitting with. Megalodon rose because the whales were abundant. The whales, in the end, grew greatest because Megalodon fell. The predator and its prey had climbed together for 50 million years, each shaping the other, and even the giant's disappearance was, in its way, a gift to the lineage it had hunted, the removal of a ceiling that had held the whales beneath their full potential. The grip of the great shark had held the warm sea in one shape. Its release let the sea grow into another. That an animal known almost entirely from teeth can be reconstructed in enough detail to glimpse its grip on an entire ocean, and the consequences of that grip loosening is itself a remarkable thing, and it did not come easily or quickly. Our picture of Megalodon has been built and rebuilt across centuries, through error and correction, and the story of how we came to know the giant is, in its own way, as revealing as the giant itself. Chapter 26: Megalodon in Human Hands. The Megalodon that exists today in books and films and museums is not a single, stable thing. It is a portrait that human beings have painted and repainted for centuries, each version shaped as much by the tools and imagination of its age as by the animal itself. And following that changing portrait is a lesson in how knowledge is made, revised, and made again. For most of human history, as we have seen, the teeth were not understood at all. They were tonguestones, dragon relics, charms against poison, the imagination reaching for an explanation the evidence could not yet supply. The first real turn came in the 17th century, when a careful observer, comparing a fossil tooth to the teeth in the head of a living shark, recognized the plain truth. These were shark teeth, immensely old. Nearly 2 centuries later, in the middle of the 19th century, the animal was given a formal scientific name, and Megalodon entered science proper, though still as little more than a name attached to a drawer of enormous teeth. Then came the attempts to rebuild it, and with them, the first great overreach. In the early 20th century, a famous reconstruction of Megalodon's jaws was assembled and displayed an enormous set of jaws, wide enough for several people to stand within, built to show the world the scale of the vanished monster. It was a sensation. It was also too big. The reconstruction had been built with teeth arranged and sized in a way that implied a shark far larger than the evidence truly supported. And later, more careful work would shrink the estimate considerably. But the image had already taken hold. The Megalodon is a great white shark blown up to impossible proportions, jaws agape, a monster scaled to our fears. For the better part of a century, that was the animal, the great white model, enlarged, its every reconstruction borrowing the body of its distant living cousin, because no better body was available. Popular culture seized the image and magnified it. In documentaries and, most spectacularly, in a blockbuster film that pitted a resurrected Megalodon against modern humans, the giant became a creature of pure spectacle, a monster from the deep, all teeth and menace, as far from the patient work of paleontology as a dragon is from a lizard. There is nothing wrong with the spectacle. The giant is genuinely awe-inspiring, and the fascination it stirs is real. But the gap between the monster of the screen and the animal of the evidence had grown very wide, and it was into that gap that the most recent science quietly stepped. For the newest reconstructions, as we have seen, describe an animal markedly different from the monster of a century of museums and films, not a bulked-up great white, but a long, slender, streamlined giant, closer to a lemon shark or a whale in its proportions, its very leanness, the secret of its size. The correction is still unfolding, and it may be revised again as new fossils and new methods appear, but the direction is telling. With each advance, Megalodon has drifted away from the monster we imagined and towards something stranger, subtler, and more elegantly real. That is not a failure of the science. It is the science working exactly as it should, a centuries-long, cooperative, self-correcting act of imagination, disciplined at every step by evidence, patiently replacing what we assumed with what the teeth and bones can actually support. The Megalodon in our hands has always been, in part, a mirror of ourselves, of our tools, our fears, our capacity to be wrong and to correct it. And the truest version of the animal, the one now emerging, is worth seeing whole, at the very height of its reign, before we follow it down to its end. Chapter 27. The reign at its height. Before we follow Megalodon down into its long decline, it is worth pausing at the summit at the height of its reign, when everything the animal needed was in place at once and the age of ocean giants stood at its fullest. If we could return to the warm seas of the Middle Miocene, some 15 to 10 million years ago, we would find a world balanced in a plenty that has never quite been matched, with the largest hunter the ocean ever made moving through it at ease. Picture the whole of that world together as a single working system. Along the productive coasts of every warm sea, cold water welled up from the deep and met the sun, and the surface bloomed. And on that bloom the sea built its great tower of life, the schooling fish, the filter feeders, and above all the whales, the mid-sized baleen whales in their diversity and abundance, thronging the rich shallows. Around them moved the full company of the warm seas hunters, the raptorial sperm whales with their fearsome teeth, the diversifying dolphins and the rising seals, the ancestors of the great white, the ancestors of the killer whale. Sea turtles cruised the warm water, penguins and seabirds worked the surface. In some bays, strange aquatic sloths grazed the sea meadows. It was a crowded, layered, intricate world, dense with life at every level, and it could be so crowded precisely because it was so rich, because the upwelling coasts produced enough to feed them all. And at the very top of it, unhurried, moved Megalodon. Warm-bodied, streamlined, 16 meters and more of efficient power, it ranged across this world as a transoceanic wanderer, crossing whole oceans between its enormous meals, gorging on a single great whale, and then traveling for weeks on the strength of it. It was the summit of a 50-million-year climb, the fullest expression of a design the ocean had been refining since before the whales were whales. Nothing hunted it, save perhaps the boldest of the raptorial whales against its young. It was as close to a ruler as the open sea has ever produced, not through ferocity, but through a perfect and total fit between an animal and its world. There is a particular kind of peace in imagining that world at its height, and it is worth resting in for a moment. It was not a world of constant terror, whatever our films suggest. It was a world in balance, a vast, warm, productive sea, turning over its abundance year after year, generation after generation, holding its countless lives in a steady and ancient equilibrium. The giant at its summit was not an aberration or a threat to that balance, but the crowning part of it, the natural top of a system that had assembled itself across deep time. For millions of years, this was simply how the ocean was: warm, crowded, generous, and ruled, at its peak, by the largest shark that would ever live. But no height in the history of the Earth is permanent, and even at the summit the ground was beginning, imperceptibly, to shift. The warmth that underwrote the whole system was, across timescales no living thing could feel, slowly starting to withdraw. The rain was at its height, and a rain at its height has only one direction left to go. To see how the fall began, we should first appreciate how far the giant's world extended, because it was the sheer breadth of that world, and then its slow contraction, that set the shape of the ending. Chapter 28. A World in Motion. Megalodon was not a creature of one sea. It was a citizen of the whole warm ocean, and the scale of its range is one of the most striking things about it, a reach that, for most of its history, was a source of strength, and that, at the very end, became part of its undoing. The evidence for that global reach is written in the distribution of the teeth. They have been recovered from the Americas, from Europe, from Africa, from Asia, from Australia, from nearly every coast that was warm and productive during the giant's long reign. This was not a shark confined to a single region, but a predator spread across the warm belt of the entire planet, and the model of its energetics helps explain how an animal that could cross thousands of kilometers of open ocean between meals was built, quite literally, to wander the world. A single megalodon might feed off one coast and, on the strength of that one enormous meal, travel a distance comparable to crossing an entire ocean basin before feeding again. The giant was a globe-spanning traveler, and its range was as vast as the warm seas themselves. For most of its history, this breadth was a profound advantage. A predator spread across the whole warm world is a resilient one. If prey thinned in one region, there were others. If conditions turned in one sea, the lineage endured in a dozen more. A global range is a hedge against local misfortune, a spreading of the risk across the entire planet. This is part of why Megalodon persisted for so long, 20 million years at the summit through all the ordinary fluctuations of a restless ocean. No single bad coast, no single failed season could threaten an animal that ruled the warm seas of the world. But researchers who have mapped where Megalodon's fossils occur across the successive ages of its reign have found something telling. The range did not stay fixed. It shifted through time, and toward the end it did not merely shift but contract. As the long cooling of the seas set in, the warm belt that defined the giant's world began to narrow, drawing inward toward the equator, and Megalodon's distribution appears to have drawn inward with it pulling back from the higher latitudes it had once ranged, retreating toward the shrinking band of warm, productive coast that alone could sustain it. The global animal was being gathered, degree by degree, into a smaller and smaller portion of the globe. This is the quiet danger hidden inside the giant's great strength. A range spread across the whole warm world protects an animal only for as long as that warm world stays broad. When the warm belt itself begins to shrink, when the very conditions that define where the animal can live start to contract toward the tropics, then a global range does not protect at all. It simply becomes a smaller and smaller range, its scattered strongholds winking out one by one as the cold closes in around them. The breadth that had been Megalodon's insurance was quietly being canceled, not by any failure of the animal, but by the slow withdrawal of the warmth it required. How that warmth withdrew, and what its withdrawal did to the giant, is the story of the ending. But an ending reconstructed from teeth is only ever as trustworthy as the teeth themselves, and before we follow the giant down, it is worth understanding how a single shed tooth survives across millions of years to become the record we have been reading all along, and how much, even now, that record still refuses to tell us. Chapter 29. A Tooth's Journey. We have read the entire animal from its teeth, its size, its diet, its warmth, its way of hunting. It is worth stopping to consider how extraordinary it is that we have any teeth to read at all, because the journey a single tooth must survive to reach a human hand across 3 million years is a gauntlet of chance from beginning to end, and understanding that journey is part of understanding how partial and how precious the record truly is. It begins with abundance. A shark sheds teeth constantly, thousands across a lifetime, and Megalodon, ranging the warm coasts of the world in great numbers, rained teeth onto the seafloor in quantities beyond counting. But abundance at the source does not guarantee survival. The great majority of those teeth were simply lost, dissolved in seawater, ground to fragments by currents, scattered and buried too slowly to be preserved, or left exposed on the seafloor until they crumbled. For a tooth to become a fossil, it must be buried, and buried quickly, before the sea can destroy it. This is where the productive coasts prove decisive a second time. The same rich, upwelling shelves that fed the whales and drew the giant also laid down the fine, mineral-rich sediments that bury teeth fast and gently, sealing them away from the destructive reach of the water. And in some of these places, the water chemistry itself favored preservation. Coasts rich in phosphate, the mineral of bone and tooth, not only protected the teeth but helped harden and preserve them. It is no accident that the greatest concentrations of Megalodon teeth come from phosphate-rich fossil coasts, the phosphate mines of the American East, the exceptional deposits of Peru where the very chemistry of the ancient sea conspired to keep the giant's teeth safe across the ages. Buried in such sediment, a tooth slowly mineralized, minerals seeping into it, hardening it, staining it, the dark colors of the surrounding rock, which is why the fossil teeth we find are so often black or brown rather than the pale ivory of a living shark's. Even then, the journey is not over. And here it grows complicated in a way that matters for the whole story. Over millions of years, the seas rise and fall, and old rock is eroded and redeposited. A tooth buried in one age can be washed out, carried along, and reburied in the sediments of a much later one, reworked, in the language of geology, from an older layer into a younger. This constant reshuffling is part of why dating Megalodon's disappearance is so difficult. A tooth found in a given layer of rock did not necessarily come from an animal that lived when that layer formed, and telling the genuine last teeth from the reworked stragglers is painstaking work. The record is not a clean ledger. It is a shuffled and incomplete one, and reading it honestly means reckoning with every step of the journey each tooth has taken. Finally, after all of this, the shedding, the burial, the mineralizing, the reshuffling, the tooth must be found. It weathers out of a sea cliff, or a riverbed, or the wall of a quarry or a phosphate mine, and comes to rest where a human eye happens to fall on it. Every megalodon tooth in every museum drawer and every collector's cabinet is the survivor of this entire gauntlet, a single lucky object that ran the whole obstacle course of deep time and emerged intact. The record we reason from is not the animal, it is the thin, chance-filtered residue of the animal, the small fraction that survived to be found. To hold that clearly in mind is to understand why so much about Megalodon remains, even now, genuinely and honestly unknown. Chapter 30. What we still don't know. For all its fame, and for all the patient work of centuries, Megalodon remains in many ways a mystery, and it is worth naming honestly the things we still do not know, because the not knowing is not a failure of the science, but the living edge of it, the place where the animal is still being discovered. We do not truly know how large it could grow. The recent studies point toward a slender giant reaching, at the very upper extreme, perhaps 24 meters, but that figure is an extrapolation from a few unusually large vertebrae, and the typical size of a full-grown megalodon, and the true maximum, remain genuinely debated. We do not know the exact shape of its body. The slender reconstruction is recent and compelling, but with no complete skeleton anywhere on Earth, the precise form and placement of its fins, the details of its outline, are still reasoned estimates rather than settled facts. We do not know exactly how warm-blooded it was, mesothermic to what degree, keeping which tissues how warm, only that the evidence points to a body warmer than the sea. We do not know, with certainty, the full balance of its diet, whether it leaned most on the largest whales or on the smaller, more abundant ones, and how that balance shifted across its range and its life. We do not know precisely when or how it died out. The best estimates cluster around 3.5 million years ago, but the extinction may have been asynchronous, unfolding at different times in different seas, and the relative weight of the causes, the cooling, the vanishing whales, the lost nurseries, the rising competitors, is still weighed differently by different researchers. We do not fully understand its reproduction, how many pups it bore, how often, or exactly where its nurseries lay, and we do not know, in any final sense, why nothing has ever grown to take its place, why the throne it left has stayed empty for 3 million years. There is something clarifying, even calming, in laying these unknowns out plainly. It reminds us that Megalodon is not a solved problem filed away in a textbook, but an animal still emerging from the rock, one fossil at a time. A better vertebral column, a rarer find, a new method of reading old teeth, any of these could shift the picture tomorrow, as the discovery of a Belgian spine and a fresh way of comparing living sharks recently overturned 2 centuries of assumption. The giant is still being reconstructed, still surprising the people who study it, still refusing to be finally pinned down. For an animal that dissolved almost entirely into the sea and left only its teeth, that lingering mystery is fitting, and it is, in its own way, part of the wonder. But there is one question that stands above all the others, the question toward which this whole long story has been bending from the beginning, and on it the evidence, for all its gaps, does converge. It is the simplest question of all, and the most human. Why did it vanish? Why did the largest, most powerful hunter the ocean ever made disappear from a world its lineage had ruled for tens of millions of years, while smaller, humbler creatures swam on? The answer begins not with a catastrophe or a rival or a dying star, but with something quieter and more fundamental than any of them, the slow withdrawal of the warmth the giant could not live without, and the first hard limit that warmth's retreat imposed, the cold that Megalodon could not cross. Chapter 31. The cold it could not cross. Megalodon's teeth have been found on the shores of nearly every continent, in the Americas, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in Australia. There is one great exception, and it is telling. They have not been found in Antarctica. The absence is not an accident of where people have searched. It is a clue to the nature of the animal. Megalodon was a creature of warm water, and the cold sea around the frozen south was a threshold it did not cross. Why should a predator so powerful be bound by temperature? The answer lies in that warm-bodied, high-powered biology we met earlier. A mesothermic giant, an animal holding its great body warmer than the surrounding sea, pays for that warmth with an enormous and unrelenting appetite. Heat is energy, and energy is food. To keep its furnace lit, Megalodon had to eat and eat and eat. Such an animal is most at home, where prey is dense and the water is warm enough that its own warmth is not a constant, ruinous expense. Push it into cold water and 2 things happen at once. The cost of staying warm rises steeply, and the warm-blooded prey it depends on tends to grow scarcer or to have moved away. The cold did not have to kill Megalodon directly. It only had to make the cold seas not worth the entering, and so it fenced the animal into the warm belt of the world. For most of its reign, this was no constraint at all. The Miocene Ocean was broadly warm, its productive shallows spread wide, and the warm belt Megalodon required was vast. The animal ranged across the globe within it, its nurseries tucked into warm coastal shallows, its hunting grounds following the whales through temperate and tropical seas. A boundary you never need to approach is not a boundary you feel. For millions of years, the cold at the edges of the world was simply somewhere Megalodon had no reason to go. But a boundary fixed in temperature is not fixed in space. If the warm belt shrinks, if the whole ocean cools, and the warm water retreats toward the equator, and the productive shallows drain away, then the walls of Megalodon's world begin to close inward, not because the animal has changed, but because the sea has. The line it could not cross would come to it. And that is exactly what began to happen as the Miocene gave way to the cooler epochs that followed. The story now turns from the animal to its slowly changing world, and to the long, quiet withdrawal of the warmth that had made Megalodon possible. Chapter 32, When the Ocean Cooled. Nothing about the end of Megalodon was sudden. There was no single day, no single disaster. There was, instead, a slow turning of the whole ocean system across millions of years, a cooling, a rearranging, a draining, each change modest in any human span, and each pushing in the same direction. To follow it is to watch a world withdraw the conditions one of its greatest animals required, so gradually that no individual creature could ever have perceived the change at all. The largest of these turnings was temperature. After the warmth of the earlier Miocene, global climate entered a long cooling trend that would deepen over the following epochs into the ice ages. Polar regions grew colder, ice began to accumulate, and as water was locked into that growing ice, sea levels fell. The fall in sea level had a consequence that struck Megalodon at a vulnerable point. It drained the shallow coastal seas. Those warm, productive shallows had been the richest hunting grounds and, just as importantly, the nurseries, the sheltered warm water margins where young Megalodons were born and grew. As the shallows receded, both the pantry and the cradle contracted together. At the same time, the map itself was changing in a way that reshaped the currents of the world. The Isthmus of Panama, which for so long had left the Atlantic and the Pacific joined, was slowly rising and closing. When that gateway finally shut, it severed a tropical connection between the two great oceans and forced a wholesale rerouting of ocean currents, altering where warm water flowed, where nutrients rose, where the productive zones lay. Ocean circulation is the ocean's circulatory system. Change its channels and you change where the sea is rich and where it is poor, where it is warm and where it is cold. The closing of Panama was one of the great climatic events of the age, and its ripples ran through every food web that depended on the old arrangement. None of this, in itself, was catastrophe. Cooling seas and shifting currents are the ordinary business of a restless planet, and life had weathered such changes many times. But Megalodon was an animal exquisitely tuned to a particular kind of ocean. Warm, shallow-margined, whale-rich, and every one of these slow turnings pared away a little more of that ocean. The warm belt narrowed, the shallows drained, the currents that had fed the productive coasts shifted their courses. The world was not being destroyed, it was simply, patiently, becoming a place with less and less room for a warm water giant. And the clearest sign of that shrinking room appeared not in the water itself, but in the disappearance of the one thing Megalodon could not do without, its prey. Chapter 33, The Prey Retreats. A predator does not usually starve because every last meal has vanished. It starves because its particular prey, the food its body is built to take, has grown too scarce, or moved too far to sustain it. For Megalodon, the fatal change was not the cooling of the sea in the abstract. It was what the cooling did to the whales. Across the late Miocene and into the Pliocene, the great community of mid-sized baleen whales that had fed Megalodon began to change. Their diversity declined, many kinds dwindled and disappeared. Of the many genera of baleen whales known from that time, only a handful have surviving lineages today, verify, and the survivors, tellingly, tended toward larger size, the ancestors of the huge whales that migrate the modern oceans. The abundant mid-sized whales that had been Megalodon's staple, the animals of just the right size to hunt and rich enough to be worth the hunting, were thinning from the world, and those that remained were, increasingly, going where Megalodon could not follow. As the seas cooled, whales did what warm-blooded animals can do, and cold-bound ones cannot. They shifted their ranges toward the poles, following the productivity that upwelling cold water can support, feeding in the frigid, nutrient-rich seas that were becoming the new centers of ocean life. A baleen whale, insulated by blubber and free to roam the cold, could migrate to where the food was. Megalodon could not. Bound to warm water by its own biology, it watched if an animal can be said to watch across generations its prey migrate into a country close to it. Beneath even this lay a deeper shift. At the very base of the food web, the tiny drifting algae that begin every ocean food chain changed as well. There is evidence of decline and reorganization among the diatoms, the microscopic plants whose abundance ultimately underwrites everything above. When the base of a food web falters, the effect climbs upward through every level, but it strikes hardest and last at the very top at the largest, hungriest animals, the ones that need the most and can least afford a lean season. Megalodon sat at that summit, and the ground beneath the summit was slowly giving way. Here the specialist's curse comes fully due. A generalist could adjust shift prey, shift range, tolerate the cold, make do with less. Megalodon could do none of these things well. It was too large to subsist on small prey, too warm-bound to chase its whales into polar seas, too hungry to endure scarcity for long. Every avenue of escape that its smaller rivals possessed was, for the giant, closed. The prey was retreating into a world Megalodon's body forbade it to enter, and no amount of power at the top of a food web can help an animal that can no longer reach its food. What remained was the slow tightening of every pressure at once. The squeeze. Chapter 34. The squeeze. Extinction, when it comes to a great and widespread animal, rarely arrives as a single blow. It arrives as a convergence, several pressures, each survivable alone, closing together until the space an animal needs to live simply disappears. For Megalodon, the late chapters of its story are the story of that convergence. Not one cause, but a tightening of many at once, upon an animal that had fewer and fewer ways to give. Consider what was happening together. The warm shallows were draining, taking the nurseries with them, so that fewer young were born and fewer survived to grow. The mid-sized whales were declining and migrating poleward, so that the prey the adults required was thinning and drifting out of reach. The cooling seas were shrinking the warm belt the whole population depended on, fragmenting a once continuous global range into scattered warm pockets. And into those same shrinking waters had come new competitors, the adaptable early great whites, and the raptorial whales dividing a prize that was already diminishing. Each of these alone, Megalodon had likely weathered before. Together, and sustained across long spans of time, they formed a vice. The animal's own magnificence deepened the trouble. A great specialist has little slack. Megalodon's enormous, warm-bodied frame demanded a steady flow of large, rich meals. It could not throttle down to a small predator's economy, could not subsist on scraps, could not wait out a lean century on stored fat and low ambition, the way a more modest hunter might. The very features that had made it the supreme predator of a rich ocean, its size, its warmth, its specialization on great prey became, in a poor and cooling ocean, a set of fixed and heavy costs that the world could no longer pay. The largest animals in a food web are always the first to feel a shortage, because they need the most, and Megalodon needed more than anything that has ever swum. Range fragmentation added a final, quiet danger. When a continuous population is broken into isolated pockets, a warm bay here, a warm coast there, separated by seas grown too cool to cross each pocket becomes vulnerable on its own. A local run of bad years, a local collapse of prey, and that pocket winks out, with no way for animals from elsewhere to move in and refill it. A species spread thin across scattered refuges can vanish not in one great extinction but in a series of small, unremarked local ones, each barely visible in the record, until one day the last pocket is empty. This, more than any single dramatic cause, is likely how the largest shark that ever lived came to its end. Not slain, but slowly enclosed, its world contracting around it faster than it could adapt. And yet, precisely because the ending was so gradual and so multi-causal, it has left room for other explanations, including one that reaches beyond the Earth entirely, to a dying star. It is a striking idea, and it deserves an honest hearing, if only to see why most of the evidence now sets it gently aside. Chapter 35. The star that probably wasn't. Of all the explanations offered for Megalodon's disappearance, one reaches further than any other past the cooling seas and the migrating whales, past the Earth itself, out to a dying star. It is among the most arresting ideas in the whole story, and it is worth telling carefully, both because it is genuinely fascinating and because the way scientists have handled it is a small lesson in how careful thinking works when the stakes are only the truth. The idea begins with a real and strange discovery on the ocean floor. Buried in ancient seabed sediments, scattered across the world, lies a faint dusting of a particular form of iron, iron-60, an isotope that is not made in any ordinary earthly process. Iron-60 is forged in the death of massive stars, in the titanic explosions called supernovae. Its presence in seabed layers dated to around 2.5 to 2.5 million years ago is taken as evidence that one or more supernovae detonated in our galactic neighborhood at roughly that time, near enough to sprinkle the Earth with the debris of a stellar death. This is not fringe speculation. The iron-60 is really there, and the supernovae almost certainly happened. From that solid fact, a bolder proposal was built. A nearby supernova would have bathed the Earth in a pulse of radiation, and may, some researchers suggested, have nudged the climate, perhaps deepening the cooling already underway, perhaps stressing marine life. Could such an event have been the trigger, or a trigger, for the wave of extinctions among large ocean animals in the Pliocene, the wave that, on this reading, swept Megalodon away with it? It is a haunting picture, the largest shark that ever lived, undone in part by the death of a star, and yet the picture very likely does not hold, for the simplest and most decisive of reasons: timing. The supernova signal centers on about 2.5 million years ago, but the best current estimates place Megalodon's extinction considerably earlier, closer to 3.5 million years ago. If the shark was already gone by the time the star's light and dust arrived, then the supernova cannot have killed it. The giant had left the stage before that particular curtain fell. The cosmic explanation, for all its grandeur, appears to be an answer to a question of the wrong date. There is something quietly admirable in how this plays out. The appeal of a cosmic cause is real. It is a more dramatic story, and human minds are drawn to dramatic stories. But the discipline of the work is to let the dates decide, and the dates, patiently gathered, set the star aside. Which raises the obvious question, the one on which the whole matter turns. How does anyone know when Megalodon actually died out, when all that remains of it are scattered teeth and scattered rock? The answer is a small marvel of reasoning in its own right. Chapter 36. Reading the Last Tooth. Dating the extinction of an animal known only from fossils poses a difficulty that is easy to miss and, once seen, hard to unsee. The last fossil you find is almost never the last individual that lived. Fossilization is rare and chancy. Only a tiny fraction of any creature that ever existed leaves a trace, and a tinier fraction still is ever found. So the youngest Megalodon tooth in the record marks not the moment the species vanished, but merely the last time the accidents of preservation and discovery happened to align. The true extinction always lies somewhere beyond the last fossil, hidden in the silence after the record runs out. Paleontologists have a name for this bias, the tendency for the last known appearance of a species to fall short of its true end. Because preservation thins out toward the finish, the recorded final appearances of a group are systematically too early, like footprints that stop at the edge of a beach, not because the walker stopped there, but because the sand beyond took no prints. Left uncorrected, this bias would have us date every extinction too soon. The way through is statistical, and rather elegant. If you gather all the reliable last appearance dates for an animal across many sites, they form a pattern clustering densely through the animal's heyday, then thinning as the end approaches. From the shape of that thinning, a method called optimal linear estimation can project where the record would truly have run out if preservation were perfect. It reads the trailing edge of the fossils and estimates the real endpoint beyond them. It is, in effect, a way of listening carefully to the fading of the record and calculating where the sound would have stopped. This is the approach a team led by the paleontologist Robert Bosenecker applied to Megalodon in a careful reanalysis. They went through the known occurrences one by one, vetting each, throwing out records that could not be trusted or securely dated, keeping only the solid ones. From that cleaned record, the statistical estimate placed Megalodon's extinction at a median of around 3.5 million years ago, older than an earlier, looser estimate of about 2.5 million, that had, not coincidentally, invited the supernova story. The tighter date is what closes the door on the star. The same careful work surfaced two further, quieter truths. The extinction may have been asynchronous. Megalodon may have disappeared from some regions well before others, winking out pocket by pocket as its scattered warm refuges failed, rather than all at once, in a single global moment. And, tellingly, Many of the animals Megalodon had preyed upon survived long after the shark itself was gone. That single observation carries real weight, because it rules out the idea that some great marine catastrophe swept away predator and prey together. Whatever ended Megalodon was selective. It took the giant specialist while sparing much of what it ate, and a cause that removes the largest, hungriest, most specialized animal, while leaving the smaller and more adaptable ones behind is not a catastrophe at all. It is exactly the fingerprint of a slowly cooling, prey-shifting, competitor-crowded world, the squeeze we have already watched close. The dating does not merely tell us when Megalodon died. It tells us, by what it spared, how. Chapter 37, An Ocean Without Its Giant. When the last Megalodon died in whatever quiet, unwitnessed warm bay it happened, something ended that has never returned. In the millions of years since, through all the changes the oceans have passed through, no shark has ever again grown to that size. The niche of the giant macro-predatory shark, occupied and reoccupied by the Megatooth dynasty for tens of millions of years, fell empty at the close of the Pliocene and has stayed empty ever since. The modern ocean, for all its life, is an ocean organized around that absence. Part of the niche was inherited, but only part. The great white shark, that adaptable cousin whose survival we have already traced, took up the role of the ocean's foremost predatory shark and holds it still. But the great white never grew into a second Megalodon, and by everything we now understand, it never could. Bound to its stocky, powerful build, it runs into the same hydrodynamic wall that caps stocky swimmers at around 7 meters. To become a true giant, a shark would have to abandon that muscular form for the long, slender shape of a whale shark or a basking shark, and those giants are gentle filter feeders, not hunters. The particular combination Megalodon achieved enormous size and slender efficiency, and the appetite and armament of an apex predator all at once has not been assembled again. Instead, the ocean filled the top of its food web with animals of a different kind. The great predators of the modern sea are, more and more, the warm-blooded ones, the orcas, hunting in coordinated families with a cleverness no shark can match, the large-toothed whales, and among the fish, the great white and its relatives, formidable but modest beside the vanished giant. The ocean did not rebuild Megalodon. It routed around it, distributing the work of apex predation among smaller, more flexible, often more social hunters, none of them requiring the vast, warm, whale-choked seas that the Megatooth line had needed to sustain a single enormous body. Why did nothing simply rise to take Megalodon's exact place? Because the place itself had gone. A predator of that scale was not a fixed slot waiting to be refilled. It was a possibility that existed only when a particular kind of ocean existed, warm, broad, shallowed, and packed with mid-sized whales. When those conditions passed, the possibility passed with them. Gigantism at Megalodon's level was not a throne but a confluence, and confluences do not simply recur on demand. The empty niche is, in this sense, less a vacancy than a monument. A shape in the water, left by an animal the sea can no longer build. There is a strange comfort in that emptiness. Once the alarm of the word extinction fades, the ocean was not diminished into barrenness by Megalodon's passing. It was reorganized, and it went on, teeming, into the world we swim in now. The giant's disappearance made room for the whales that grew larger once their greatest hunter was gone, for the diversification of the predators that remained, for the particular abundance of the modern sea. To understand that fully, though, we have to step back from the animal one last time and consider the thing that all of this has quietly been about. Not the shark alone, but the depth of time it moved through, and how small a figure even a giant cuts against it. Chapter 38, The Teeth That Remain. Walk a certain kind of beach, anywhere in the warm and temperate world, or look closely at the walls of an old quarry cut through marine rock, and you may find them still the teeth, broad, dark triangles of fossilized enamel, worn smooth by tides or sharp as the day they were shed, turning up by the thousand across the continents. They are, for most people, the only part of Megalodon they will ever hold, and there is a fitting completeness in that. The animal that we know almost entirely through its teeth continues to reach us. Across 3.5 million years, through those same teeth, there is a reason they are so abundant, and it is a small wonder of shark biology. A shark does not keep its teeth for life. It grows them in endless rows, and as the front teeth are worn or lost, new ones move forward to replace them in a slow conveyor that never stops. A single shark may shed and replace many thousands of teeth across its lifetime. So even an animal we possess, no skeleton have scattered its teeth across the ancient seafloor in enormous numbers, seeding the sediments of the world with the one part of itself that could endure. The very feature that makes the rest of Megalodon vanish, its perishable cartilage body, is mirrored by the feature that makes its teeth so plentiful. It left almost nothing of itself, and it left it everywhere. For most of human history, as we have seen, no one knew what these were. They were tongue stones, dragon relics, charms against poison, the human imagination filling the gap that knowledge had not yet reached. It took the patient insight of a 17th century observer, comparing a fossil tooth to the teeth in a living shark's head, to see the plain truth beneath the legend, and it took 2 more centuries before the animal had a name and a place in the order of life. Even now, the reconstruction continues. The slender-bodied megalodon of the most recent studies looks markedly different from the museum models of only a generation ago, and it may be revised again as new vertebrae, new methods, and new comparisons come to light. That ongoing, unfinished quality is not a weakness of the science. It is the honest texture of trying to know a vanished world from fragments. Every claim about Megalodon rests on a chain of inference from tooth to jaw, from vertebra to spine, from the proportions of living sharks to the proportions of a dead one, and each link is held together by evidence and hedged where the evidence thins. The picture is built by many hands, across many countries and many decades. The finder on the beach, the curator in the collection, the anatomist with the calipers, the modeler with the equations, each adding a little to a portrait no one of them could complete alone. It is a slow, cooperative, centuries-long act of imagination disciplined by fact, and the animal it recovers, uncertain at the edges, is all the more real for being so carefully drawn. And what that long effort finally reveals is not only a shark. It is a window onto a scale of time so vast that the mind can barely stand at its edge, the deep time in which Megalodon lived and ruled and vanished, and against which all of it, the whole reign of the largest hunter the ocean ever made, is only a single bright chapter. But before we widen to that view, it is worth returning, one last time, to the animal itself, not as a puzzle of teeth and estimates, but as a living creature moving through a living sea on an ordinary night more than 3 million years gone. Chapter 39, A Return to the Warm Sea. Picture the warm sea at the close of a Miocene day. The light comes down through the surface in long green shafts and fails a little deeper, so that the water below is a soft, shifting blue that fades to shadow beneath. The coast is somewhere off to one side, a line of shallows where the sunlight still reaches the sand. And moving through the open water, unhurried, is a long, dark shape, not the bulky monster of old paintings, but a smooth, tapering body, more like a vast, slender whale than a bulldog, gliding with the economy of an animal that has never had to rush. She is warm inside, warmer than the water around her, and that warmth is a quiet engine that lets her muscles work smoothly through the cooling evening. She does not swim so much as travel, each slow beat of the tail carrying her forward with almost no waste. Her senses read the sea in ways beyond sight, the faint electrical fields of living muscle, the pressure of distant movement rippling through the water, the taste of the sea itself, thick with information. She is not hunting yet. She is simply present in her ocean, one enormous life among the countless smaller ones, moving through a world entirely suited to her. Somewhere ahead, a group of mid-sized whales is feeding along the edge of the productive shallows, straining the plankton-rich water, their calls carrying through the blue. She turns toward them, not with the darting hunger of a small hunter, but with the patience of an animal for whom a single success will mean days of ease. She matches their pace from below and behind, in the dim water where her long shape is only a deeper shade of the dark, and she waits, reading, closing, choosing. When at last she commits, the movement is sudden and complete, a surge upward through the water, the great jaws opening, the strike aimed at the chest where the vital things are. It is over quickly, the sea settles, and in the calm that follows, she feeds, and the ordinary machinery of the warm ocean turns over once more, as it has for millions of years. There is nothing monstrous in this, seen plainly. It is only an animal doing what its long lineage shaped it to do, in the only world it ever knew, a world that was warm and crowded and generous, and that asked of her exactly the qualities she had. To watch her move through it is to see not a nightmare but a fit, a perfect matching of creature to place. And that fit, that deep belonging, began as it did for every megalodon that ever lived, not here in the open blue, but back in the bright shallows off the coast, in the warm cradle where the giants were born. Chapter 40, The Shallow Cradle. Every one of these enormous animals began small, though small for a megalodon is a relative word. The fossil evidence suggests that a newborn megalodon entered the world already some 3.5 to 4 meters long, verify the size of a large modern shark at the very start of its life, and larger than most adult predators the sea has ever produced. There was no vulnerable infancy in any ordinary sense. A megalodon pup was, from its first day, one of the most formidable animals in its waters. That formidable start appears to have been bought at a stark price, paid before birth. Like their living relatives among the great sharks, megalodons very likely gave birth to live young, and very likely practiced a grim prenatal economy. Within the mother, the developing embryos consumed unfertilized eggs, and possibly, as in some living sharks, one another, so that only a few, well-fed, enormous pups were finally born. It is a hard image, but it is the mechanism behind those giant newborns. The species invested everything in a small number of large, capable offspring rather than many small and fragile ones, front-loading each pup with the size it needed to survive from its first moment in the open sea. Where those pups were born matters as much as how. The evidence points to warm, shallow coastal waters serving as nurseries, sheltered margins where the young could grow through their most vulnerable years, safe from the largest predators of the open ocean, including, perhaps, adult megalodons themselves. This same pattern of coastal nurseries can be read in the fossil beds of megalodons' ancestors. There are places where the teeth are overwhelmingly those of juveniles, the unmistakable signature of a birthing and rearing ground. A shark cradle preserved in stone. The warm shallows were where the dynasty renewed itself, generation after generation. We can even glimpse how a young megalodon grew, because the rare vertebrae that survive sometimes carry growth bands, layers laid down over time, like the rings of a tree, that record the animal's expansion year by year. Reading these bands, researchers have estimated that Megalodon grew quickly, perhaps around twice as fast as a great white verify, and that its growth slowed toward maturity at something like 25 years of age. Verify, implying a long juvenile stretch and a delayed entry into breeding. A slow-maturing, few offspring animal is superbly adapted to a stable and abundant world, where each carefully made young has every chance to reach its enormous adulthood. But it is a strategy with little reserve. When the world turns harsh, an animal that breeds slowly and sparingly cannot quickly replace its losses. And a run of failed nurseries, a stretch of drained, cooling, prey-poor shallows can pull a population down faster than it can recover. So the very cradle that made Megalodon possible was also, in the end, part of its exposure. The warm coastal shallows were the pantry, the nursery, and the vulnerability. All at once, and when the seas cooled and the shallows drained, it was here, in the lost cradle, that the future quietly failed. But that failure lay far ahead of the warm and crowded prime of the age. To feel how rich that prime truly was, we should look at why these particular seas teemed so, at the hidden engine that filled the warm shallows with life in the first place. Chapter 41, where the sea was richest. The ocean is not evenly alive. Vast stretches of it, then as now, were near deserts, clear, blue, and thinly populated. The riches that built Megalodon were concentrated in particular places, along particular coasts, and understanding why those places teemed explains why the age of ocean giants happened where and when it did. The key is a process that brings the deep sea's hidden wealth up into the light. Through most of the ocean, the nutrients that life depends on, the raw materials that let the surface algae grow, tend to sink, drifting down with dead and decaying matter into the dark, where they are lost to the sunlit layer that needs them. But along certain coasts, and where certain currents diverge, deep water is drawn upward toward the surface, carrying those sunken nutrients back into the light. Where this upwelling meets the sun, the surface algae bloom in extraordinary densities, and on that bloom an entire tower of life is built. Small grazers, then small fish and filter feeders, then larger hunters, and at the very top the giants. Upwelling is the engine that turns a blue desert into a crowded sea. The Miocene arranged this engine on a grand scale. Its warm climate, its particular arrangement of continents and currents, and its broad flooded coastal shelves combined to produce zones of exceptional productivity along many of the world's coasts. These were the whale pastures, the rich, plankton-fed shallows, where the mid-sized baleen whales gathered to feed, and where, therefore, the predators that ate whales could find them. The geography of Megalodon's world was, in effect, a map of upwelling. The giant went where the whales went, and the whales went where the sea was richest, and the sea was richest where the deep water rose into the sun. This is why the changes we have traced struck so hard. When the seas cooled and the currents rerouted, when the closing of the Panama Gateway rearranged the flow of warm water, when the falling sea level drained the productive shelves, it was not only temperature that shifted, the very engine of productivity moved. Upwelling zones weakened here and strengthened there, often in colder waters toward the poles. Drawing the ocean's richness away from the warm belt, Megalodon was confined to and into seas it could not enter. The giant did not merely face a cooler ocean. It faced an ocean whose wealth was migrating out of its reach, following the cold, leaving the warm shallows quieter than they had been for millions of years. It is worth holding both halves of this together, because together they are the whole story. The same processes that had built the age of ocean giants, a warm world, broad shallow seas, strong coastal upwelling, a wealth of mid-sized whales were not permanent features of the planet. They were a passing arrangement, a window in deep time during which everything a giant shark needed happened to be in place at once. Megalodon was the fullest expression of that window, and a window, however wide, eventually closes. Which brings us, at last, to the widest view of all. The immense depth of time across which this whole story unfolded, and against which even the largest hunter the ocean ever made is only a brief and shining moment. Chapter 42: Deep Time. It is difficult, and perhaps impossible, to truly feel the depth of the time we have been moving through. The mind is built for the scale of a life, of a season, of a remembered afternoon. It was never built to hold millions of years, but it is worth trying, gently, because the effort itself is a kind of rest, a stepping back so far that the ordinary weights of the present grow small and quiet. Megalodon ruled the oceans for something on the order of 20 million years. Its wider dynasty, the long line of megatooth sharks from which it descended, reaches back more than 50 million years. Set that against the span of our own kind. All of recorded human history, every city, every empire, every written word fits into about 5,000 years. Our whole genus, the first upright creatures we would recognize as close kin, goes back only 2 or 3 million years. Anatomically, modern humans have existed for perhaps 300,000, and Megalodon was already gone, vanished from the last of its warm refuges, more than 3 million years ago, before there was anyone to see it, before the first of our ancestors had learned to shape a stone. No human eye ever watched a living Megalodon. It belonged entirely to a world that closed before ours opened. Hold those numbers side by side and something shifts. The reign of the largest hunter the ocean ever made was longer than the entire history of the mammals that would one day study it. An individual Megalodon, maturing slowly over 25 years and perhaps living far longer, was a single heartbeat in the 20-million-year life of its kind, and that 20 million years was itself only a chapter in the far longer story of the sea. We are used to thinking of these great extinct animals as belonging to the distant past, but the past has its own vast interior, its own deep centuries stacked on centuries, in which whole dynasties rose and ruled and ended, each feeling, no doubt, as permanent in its moment as our own world feels to us. There is nothing frightening in this, once the mind settles into it. Quite the opposite. To know that the ocean has held and lost so many giants, and gone on warm and then cool and then warm again, full and then thinned and then full once more, is to feel the enormous, unhurried patience of the sea. The world did not end when Megalodon ended. It turned a page. The warm shallows drained, and in other ages flooded again. The whales that had thinned grew great once more, larger than any that Megalodon ever hunted. The empty summit of the food web was quietly refilled with new kinds of life. Nothing was truly lost that the long turning of the sea could not, in time, replace with something else. And that long turning is still going on tonight, in the dark water beyond every coastline, indifferent and calm and immensely old. The same ocean that built and unmade the largest shark that ever lived is out there now, holding its countless lives, keeping its slow time. Against that depth, the cares of a single evening are very small and very light, small enough, perhaps, to set down for a while, which returns us, at the last, to the question we began with, and to the gentle answer the whole long story has been quietly assembling. Chapter 43: The Largest Hunter the Ocean Ever Made. We began with a question. How did a warm, whale-filled ocean build the largest hunter the sea has ever made, and why, when we finally reconstructed it, was it nothing like the monster we had imagined, and why did it vanish while smaller hunters swam on? We have followed the whole long answer, and we can now gather it into a single quiet close. The ocean built Megalodon out of abundance. A warm world, broad, shallow seas, and the rising of deep water into the sunlight filled certain coasts with life. and that life rose, tier upon tier, into a great population of mid-sized whales, the richest prey the sea had ever assembled. Across tens of millions of years, a dynasty of sharks refined itself, tooth by tooth, toward the single task of hunting those whales, until the last and largest of the line reached a size no shark had held before or has held since. Megalodon was not an accident or an aberration. It was the fullest thing a rich, warm, whale-filled ocean could grow at its very summit. And it was nothing like the monster of our imagination, because our imagination borrowed the wrong body. For 2 centuries, we pictured a great white shark swollen to nightmarish scale, all bulk and menace. The animal the evidence actually describes is stranger and, in its way, lovelier. Not a great white's close kin at all, but the last of a separate vanished family. Not stocky, but long and slender, shaped for the efficient glide of a giant, its very leanness the secret of its size. Warm-bodied, patient, superbly matched to its world. The real Megalodon is less a horror than a marvel of fit an animal so precisely tuned to a particular ocean that it could only ever have existed while that ocean did. That precise fit is also why it vanished while humbler hunters lived on. When the seas cooled and the currents rerouted, when the warm shallows drained and the nurseries with them, when the mid-sized whales dwindled and followed the cold toward the poles, Megalodon could not follow. It was too large to live small, too warm-bound to enter cold water, too specialized to make do. The very perfection that had made it supreme in a generous world became a set of fixed costs the poorer world could no longer meet, and its scattered warm refuges failed one by one until the last of them fell silent. The smaller, plainer hunters, the adaptable early great whites, the ranging warm-blooded whales carried none of that magnificence and none of that fragility, and so they endured, and their descendants swim in the ocean still. What Megalodon left behind is not emptiness but change. Its passing made room. The whales, no longer hunted by the greatest predator the sea had produced, grew larger through the ages that followed, until the ocean held the vastest animals that have ever lived. The summit of the food web filled again, with cleverer and more social hunters, and scattered across the beaches and quarries of nearly every warm shore, the teeth remain broad, dark, patient triangles reaching across 3.5 million years to be picked up by a human hand and turned over in the light, the last messengers of a giant that was gone before we arrived. The largest hunter the ocean ever made did not leave us its body. It left us its edge, and a world quietly reshaped by its absence, and the long, calm sea that outlasted it and holds us all tonight. And so the warm ocean that built the giant has gone still. The whales it hunted have grown great and moved on. The teeth have settled into the rock, waiting, and the sea, patient and enormous and very old, keeps its slow time in the dark, as it has through every age of giants and every quiet age between. Rest now. The water is warm and calm, and there is nothing here that needs your watching. The great shape has long since passed, and the sea has closed gently over the place where it swam. Let the numbers and the names drift away. They will still be here, if ever you want them again, tomorrow night. There is only the soft green light fading into blue, and the blue fading into a soft and easy dark. The tide moves slowly, far below. The world is old and steady and kind enough to hold you while you rest. Let your breath grow slow. Let the deep, warm quiet of the ancient sea settle over you, and let yourself drift, gently, down into sleep.